Hey, my name is Chris Brennan, and you're listening to the Astrology Podcast. In this episode, I'm going to be doing a retrospective on what the transit of Jupiter and Taurus has meant over the past year by talking to some patrons of the Astrology Podcast during a live webinar today. And we're going to be going through their stories and discussing what actual life experiences they had over the past 12 months as Jupiter has been transiting through a specific house in their chart. So the goal of this is to get an idea of what it means when Jupiter transits through each of the 12 houses, because then I think people will be able to take that information and that accumulated experience and then project it out in order to understand what the transit of Jupiter through Gemini will mean for them over the course of the next year. So we have a live audience of patrons who are joining me today. Thanks everyone who joined. A bunch of people submitted stories, patrons of the Astrology Podcast who signed up to support the podcast through my page on Patreon, signed up and submitted stories of how the transit of Jupiter through Taurus has worked out in their lives over the past year. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to go through and we're going to actually interview some people who joined me for the live stream today to talk about their life and talk about their chart to draw out the meaning of that transit and how it impacted them through some live dialogue and consultation style conversations. And then I'm also going to read some written submissions that were sent in by listeners of the podcast or by patrons of the podcast who weren't able to make it here today, but nonetheless submitted an example and a chart in order to share how that transit worked out for them. All right. So, first things first, let me show a diagram which shows the significations of the houses for those watching the video version, because this just gives you a basic idea of some of the general topics or themes that we might expect to arise when Jupiter moves through certain houses. So, for example, the fourth house is the house of parents, the home, the family, and the private life. The seventh house is the house of relationships, partnership, marriage. The 10th house is career. The 11th house is friends. The ninth house is travel, and so on and so forth. So these are some of the topics that we would expect to be activated then when Jupiter transits through that house in a person's chart. And for the purpose of this, we're going to be using whole sign houses where when Jupiter moves into a new sign, it also shifts into a new house in a person's chart. And since Jupiter is the planet of growth and expansion, sometimes this indicates a year-long period where you'll have new developments of growth and expansion in that part of the person's life that matches that house topic. So there's exceptions to that. For example, it really depends on what planets are natally in that house, if any, that Jupiter is going to be transiting, as well as sometimes aspects that Jupiter will make to other planets in the chart can either help affirm what Jupiter wants to do when it's transiting that house, or sometimes it will negate and even deny some of the significations that Jupiter wants to indicate when it's going through that house. So, as we'll see, not all of the Jupiter stories are necessarily super positive, but sometimes they can be moderately positive or just a little bit positive, but nonetheless, we'll still see some interesting developments. So, one of the things that complicates a lot of the stories that we'll be going through, there's two things. One of them is that, of course, Uranus is also transiting through Taurus. So this year was partially characterized by the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction that took place just last month in April. And that was adding a much different sort of flavor to the transit of Jupiter through Taurus than it would have if it was just transiting through that sign on its own as an outer planet. And sometimes there were themes of disruption or freedom or rebellion that were coming through in a lot of the example charts that were sent in. Um, that was distinctive and important. So that's modifying things because there's more than just Jupiter transiting through the sign. Um, another thing that was also causing some differences is we were having eclipses in Taurus and Scorpio until very recently. And one of the most recent Taurus eclipses only just took place back in October. And prior to that time, we had about a year and a half of all eclipses taking place in Taurus and Scorpio. which indicates major changes and major beginnings and major endings in the area of the life that the eclipse falls. So that means that for some people, there were also some very major turning points in their life that were coinciding with those eclipses at the same time. And sometimes those were good things, but other times they could be more challenging things. So we'll have to take that into account in terms of some of the timing as well. All right. So I think that's good. I'm going to do one quick example before I do my first interview, just because I thought it was a good example. And let me make sure. Yeah, this person wasn't here for the live stream, but I just wanted to share their story that they sent in really quickly, and I'll share it on the screen. So this was a listener named Becca Martin who wrote in. She has Aquarius rising, so Taurus was her fourth whole sign house, which is the place of the home and the living situation. And natally, she has her sun at 20 degrees of Taurus and her Mercury at 24 degrees of Taurus. So in her description, she said, after 6 months of trying to get our house ready to list and sell, we were finally ready by early April. As soon as it went live, we had one showing, which quickly turned into one asking price offer. Jupiter conjunct my sun in the fourth house, and also Mercury and the sun conjunct my Venus. So basically, she was able to sell her house extremely quickly and extremely successfully with Jupiter transiting through her fourth house and conjoining her sun and Mercury. So sometimes it can be as simple or it can be as literal as that, where it can just be a matter of having success or good fortune and things move smoothly and quickly and successfully for some significant event that happens at some point during the course of that transit. So on the one hand, that's more of a limited thing because it's a one-time event where she sold the house under that transit, but also it was something that they were working on for the greater part of that year and something they were sort of like building up towards. So it's interesting that you have both something that's localized to, especially when Jupiter got really close to hitting those planets later in Taurus, but also that there was a bit of a precursor or a build up to it as Jupiter was transiting through that sign as well. So I thought that was a good, simple example, and we'll see more examples like that coming up here soon. All right, so one of the first examples of somebody that was here is Bethany, who had a ninth house Taurus transit. Are you open to jumping on camera to talk about that transit, Bethany?
Unmute, start my video. It
All
worked.
right. There we go.
Hey,
Hi.
oh, it's so nice to be able to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks for joining me today.
I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. So, let's do first things first. What's your birth data?
9/25, 1963.
What time?
5:19 a.m.
And what city?
Greenville, Ohio.
Okay. Got it. 16 Virgo rising.
Yeah, 16, yeah, thereabouts.
Got it. Okay. So here is the chart for those watching the video version. This will be a very chart-centered episode, so I'll try to describe the placements for the audio listeners, but for the most part, this is probably one that'll be better to watch on YouTube. Does this look right?
Yeah, it does.
All right. So, general things. So you have Virgo rising. Taurus is your ninth whole sign house. And so what was that transit through your ninth house like over the past year? What were the major features?
So, my husband had work that was going to take him to Germany. So I spent a lot of time. I was so excited. I had not been back to Europe in over 30 years and was super excited about it and started doing Boku Duolingo to learn German. I knew no German whatsoever, and joined a German class. So a lot of learning. going on.
Nice.
And then we also decided to go to France, where I had been a student back in the day, like in 89, 90, and lived with a family there. So I was beyond excited to be able to get back there and go to both places.
Amazing. So
Mhm.
had you learned French previously when you were there?
Yeah, when I was there, I mean, I was never great at it, but I did live with a family and took care of a 4-year-old, and I did take classes, and so I was, you know, pretty close to being fluent. But then I left early to go to be with my husband, who was also abroad. So that cut that learning short. But I was very happy to get back there and see all those places that I had not seen in 32 years. And then, if you probably see on the chart that it's also was also my Mercury retrograde, almost exact it like a is there such a thing as a Mercury return? It is the same degree, and my Mercury was retrograde, and I was very worried about the trip. Um, I couldn't believe I booked tickets on the day Mercury went retrograde. I mean, I don't know a lot about astrology, but I should have guessed that much.
When
Uh,
when was this, or which retrograde?
it was August the 23rd was when we left.
August the 23rd. Was that the one that was partially in Virgo?
It seemed to me that it was exactly on the degree of my Mercury in Virgo.
Nice. Okay, awesome.
Right.
So yeah, that's really good in terms of the timing. Um,
But and so the other thing we got to do when we got to Germany was that my grandfather had been with the 42nd Rainbow Division. He was a young GI, and he was there when they liberated Dachau. And so a lot of my husband's work was in Munich. And so we took a day trip, and it's always profound to go to these places, but it just took my breath away when you walk through the gates. They had put up this huge plaque dedicated to the men of the 42nd Rainbow Division. And
hmm,
I can't tell you how much it meant to me in the middle of all that horror of, everything you learn about what happened at Dachau. There was that glimmer of hope, and it was my grandfather, and he was a part of it. So anyway, it meant a lot to me.
that's incredible. I mean,
Yeah,
that's really interesting also just because, the looking at your chart, just in terms of its natal rulership, like Jupiter rules your seventh house of relationships, and this was something that was partially happening because of your husband, but also Jupiter rules your fourth house natally as well, which can be like the family and ancestry and things like that. And it's interesting that you had kind of like both of those topics activated in the context of this ninth house transit.
that's right. That's right. Yeah. It's
Wow.
you can't make it up.
And so you said what were the dates again?
We left August the 23rd.
Got it. 2023. So that was right
23.
here.
Right.
Wow. Yeah. Mercury was literally, it's stationed right on your Mercury, and your natal Mercury itself is actually,
Retrograde.
well, it's not just retrograde, it's 3 days from stationing. It's retrograde and
Oh,
also stationing. How old were you? How old did you turn in September?
oh, I turned 60 in September. So this was
Oh,
before
okay.
I was 59, wasn't I?
Yeah, I think
Yeah, it
that's
was
what
right
it
before my 60th birthday.
That's what it is, though. It's because I think it's because the planetary periods of Mercury are 20 years, that Mercury always has a exact synodic return. So if a person was born at an important like a station or a Kazemi or something, then exactly 20 years later there'll be a recurrence of that. So you ended up having basically an exact recurrence of this during this trip, I think is partially what happened.
Wow. Mm.
Yeah, that's really cool and really beautiful.
Mhm.
The activation of that, and then we can see Jupiter at 15 degrees of Taurus was also trining your ascendant at
Right.
16 in Virgo at that time.
Yes.
Very cool.
Yeah, I'm
Cool.
sorry to see it go from my ninth house, but we'll see what happens next.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it'll be back eventually, and sometimes it like unlocks things. Sometimes a transit like that can unlock things like, learning German for you is something that'll stick with you, hopefully.
See.
Um, maybe you'll have occasion to like use again at some point.
Yeah, I hope so too. Anyway,
Cool.
pretty textbook example, I have to say. But thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, nice to see you.
All right, you too. All right. So I'm gonna leave you as a panelist, but we'll just turn off your audio and video so you don't have to leave the meeting. That was awesome. That was a great first example. So just clear ninth house transit of growth, expansion, especially learning, but also returning back to something from earlier is also seemed to be part of the theme of that as well, of a reoccurring theme in the life. All right, so let me look at my next examples. Okay, so Olabimpe, are you ready to join us? You have a good example. All right, let me promote you to panelist. Hey,
Hello.
thanks for joining me.
Yeah, of course.
All right, so first things first, what is your birth data?
On November 6th, 1992, 11:09 a.m., Charlottesville, Virginia.
You said Scarlettsville?
Charlottesville.
Charlottesville. All right. Is your ascendant 9 Capricorn?
Yes.
Got it. All right. So here's your chart. So you have Capricorn rising, and Taurus is your fifth whole sign house, but it also contains the degree of your IC. So there's some carryover, continuation, or doubling up of both fourth house and fifth house topics there with the Jupiter transit.
Yes, definitely.
All right. So what's your story, or how did it go?
Yeah, so Jupiter in Taurus was kind of aligned exactly with one of my late father's colleagues reaching out to me about his academic work. She had seen a memorial that we had made for him that depicted his ancestry, and then she wanted to kind of study his work and his ancestry. And in connecting with this professor, she also heard me about my project and started mentoring me on this memoir project that I'm working on that also has to do with my father. Um, and it's kind of creative work that obviously came out of grief, but because I had been in a long-term tech consulting career, it was really hard to make progress. Um, so like during this Jupiter in Taurus transit, Venus retrograde came in and maybe gave me an assist by, all of the tech layoffs that were going on. I was laid off from my job, but that also like opened up space for me to work more on this project and dedicate myself more to it.
Interesting. So it's like the Venus retrograde transit in Leo last summer would have been in your
Mhm.
eighth house. So there was like a financial setback of being laid off, but then it opened you up for having other projects that you could do related to this.
Definitely. And I was noting like a couple weekends ago, the Venus Jupiter conjunction, right before Jupiter left Taurus, coincided with this professor that has been mentoring me sharing my work for the first time to a broader audience and it getting really good reception at a conference that she wants me to present at next year.
Wow. Okay. That's
So,
incredible. And it was right on the Venus Jupiter conjunction, which is at the end of Taurus.
yeah, yeah,
Nice. Okay.
parting gift.
That's really good. And it's also cool that it's, activating a couple of things. It's activating the sun in Scorpio in your chart, which is up there in the 11th whole sign house, which is co-present with the midheaven, as well as trining your ascendant just in general. What was it, or what was the nature of like the project that you're working on, or the creative side of it?
Yeah, so it's essentially epistolary nonfiction. I started writing letters to my dad just about my grief process after he passed. And it quickly turned into a lot of different creative projects that I would then describe. So like I produced an audio play based on a musical artist that he was known for writing about. So projects like that became chapters and essays and letters in this book project that I'm working on.
Okay, wow. So that really is the fifth house component is very strong there in terms of plays and then like a real creative component.
Yeah, definitely. And the whole IC connection there, like my my dad actually has dramatic storytelling ancestry. And one of the names that he's called in his hometown in Nigeria, is Child of the Mask Bearers. And that's actually the what was on the memorial that this colleague of his saw and was so inspired by.
Wow. Okay. That's beautiful. How long ago did he pass away?
Late 2019, November 30th, 2019.
Late
That was
2019.
Uranus stationing on my IC.
Oh, okay, right. So that was shortly after Uranus had gone into Taurus and it stationed on your IC right when he passed.
Mhm.
Wow, okay. So this really has been then in some ways the transit of Uranus through Taurus has kind of bookended that entire process in terms of losing him at the beginning of that transit, and then now that we're getting towards the end of that transit with Uranus getting later in Taurus, having Jupiter swoop in there and kind of have again, you almost had it's something kind of unexpected that you suddenly had this professor that was trying to help you with that in this interesting way in terms of bookending the past. I guess it hasn't been a decade, but three-quarters of a decade since that happened.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Wow. Okay. That's really cool. What are your next? And then the last thing is just because that's happening, but then I noticed that like simultaneously last month, of course, in April also would have been the eclipse in Aries as well as the eclipse in Libra in late March. So that's activating your fourth house and your 10th house axis at the same time, which is tying together those themes of like family and ancestry as well as career and public reputation and things like that. And I can, some of those eclipses are going to continue since we'll have what is it, another Libra eclipse that's going to happen later this year, and then another Aries eclipse early next year. So where do you see things headed after this point?
Well, so there's like a very loud happening that happened right on the April eclipse this year. And the funny thing is that that eclipse, April 8th, is the eclipse that happened right after my dad's birthday when he was born. So he was born between eclipses. April 8th was an eclipse for him. So this year, there's an institute that my family has been working with since my dad passed. They made a fellowship in his name, and we also created a family foundation to kind of solidify his academic legacy. So we've been partnering with them in a lot of things, and recently sent his 5,000 book like library, home library to them as their kind of starter library for this institute in the UAE in Sharjah. And so this past eclipse was actually when, to the day that my mom got an offer for a position on their administration in that institute. And so I will be moving with my mother to the UAE, um, yeah, to start this entire new chapter based on this connection with my dad. Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. So it's like there's so many layers there. I mean, one of them is there's some like post what I've been referring to, I'm still workshopping the title, but I've been calling post-mortem astrology, where
Mhm.
people's birth charts continue to live on after they've passed away. And you can see that in this instance with that he was born, you said on an Aries eclipse or close
Mhm.
to one, and then you
Yeah.
had this major development what is it, like 4 or 5 years after he's passed away now in
Yeah.
Aries, connected with that and things about his life and the impact of his legacy are coming up again in the air and in the world.
Yeah. Definitely.
So that's incredible. And then also with that eclipse taking place in your fourth house, as well as the Jupiter IC transit, your mom and like she's actually implicated in some of it as well.
Yeah.
And then finally, if that wasn't enough, it's also indicating you moving and having a major relocation.
Yeah. It's been a loud year.
Nice. But I mean, it sounds all like really good things or really amazing
Yeah.
things.
Mhm. Definitely.
Good. All right. Thank you for sharing that. That's a really amazing example, and I like that it shows something that's hard for me to describe that I explain sometimes to people abstractly, but just that the fourth whole sign house can indicate fourth house things, but also if the IC falls in the fifth whole sign house, you get a continuation and a doubling up of those topics. And that's like easy to explain conceptually, but it's only through examples like this that you can actually really see how that works out in practice.
Yeah, definitely. It was actually confusing for me to understand before all of this happened too. So,
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks for sharing your story.
yeah, absolutely. No problem.
All right. All right. So I'm gonna keep you as a panelist and then all right. That was amazing. Yeah, Carly says what a powerful story. Thanks for sharing. Thank you. That was incredible. Um, Somebody's saying, okay, yeah, I hadn't noticed that. Erin points out in the live chat that I'll just share it again really quickly, that Venus and Jupiter in mutual reception in the 12th house, Venus, grief, and commemoration being part of the creative, productive journey, fifth house. Yeah, as well as the career, 10th house. That's really beautiful. Nice. All right. Let me look and see where we're at next. So, um, Malou, I think you're the next person that's up. You have a transit through the sixth house. Are you up for sharing? Hello.
Hi, does that work?
Yeah,
Okay,
perfect.
good. Good.
Um, so first things first, what is your birth data?
January 13th, 1953,
What time?
0656 a.m.,
And what place?
Copenhagen, Denmark. So
Got it. Okay.
I have a moon ascendant conjunction in Sagittarius. Yeah,
So your ascendant is at 25 Sagittarius?
thereabouts.
Okay. Does this chart look correct?
Absolutely. Very
All right.
correct.
Thanks, Sue, in the live chat. All right. So you have Sagittarius rising. Um,
Yes.
Jupiter is your sixth whole sign house, but because you were born in Denmark so far north in latitude, your IC is actually also over there in the sixth whole sign house in Taurus at 6 degrees of Taurus. And actually, the ruler of your ascendant, Jupiter, is also placed in Taurus at 11
Yes.
degrees. So this was a Jupiter return for you. What happened in your life, or how did those themes come up for you?
Well, what's been interesting is that we at my workplace where I've been for 17 plus years, um, we have sort of replaced half the staff actually during since last summer of last year. So the whole leadership has changed. Our daily leader and the leader above him have been replaced, and most of all the old timers have left. There's me and one other who've been there for a long time who are still there, but we're working with temps and temps and temps and a lot of new personnel.
What was
So
the reason for so many people being laid off or leaving?
they actually left voluntarily. Internal problems. We hired someone from a different walk of life and a different vocation, and that turned out to be very difficult. That nobody really got along with that person,
Got it.
and that included the leadership. So, leadership finally decided that since they had invited that person on board, they would sort of withdraw from the whole thing, and but that included the antagonist person, if you can call it that.
Hmm,
So the whole thing was just a big mess up until we finally had new leadership last year in December.
got it. And vocationally, you said that you're a family therapist and
Yeah,
social counselor, but
yeah,
also you said that at your current workplace is a residential home for handicapped people, both mental and physical, right?
that's right. Yeah.
So could you expand on that? You said before you've also worked with addicts, but what is your current? I mean, that sounds very much that's a kind of an interesting actually blend of the sixth house as well as the fourth house with the IC there, because it's a residential home for people that are
Plus,
handicapped.
yeah, plus it's actually an institution that was created by the parents to the people who live there now. So it's very unusual, and it's also unusual for Denmark. It's the first institution of its kind in Denmark, where the parents went together and they said, we don't think that, Danish authorities live up to any standard that's, valuable. We want a place for our kids that looks like this, and we're not going to send them there to any of the other institutions. And so now, 25 years later, institutions in Denmark that house handicapped people or are residential homes for people with handicaps are beginning to look like us. But this was like the initial family thing. So, family still plays a large part in the parents of the people, although they're quite old now, of course, mostly. But
So it was about initially maybe raising the standards and having a better, both in terms of treatment and care, as well as like living there, but raising the standards of that, whereas maybe they weren't as good with the government run ones prior to this.
exactly.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a great example just in terms of your like your natal chart placement of the ruler of the ascendant in the sixth house conjunct the IC. And previously I've used examples of like a doctor that I had a consultation with who had that placement and other people that are able to help people that are in a difficult situation, even if you yourself are not necessarily experiencing that, but instead you're helping other people that are in that sort of situation.
Yep. This has been a year where I haven't been ill, at all. 2 years ago, I broke my wrist, and last year I was operated acutely for appendicitis. But this year, while Jupiter has been traveling through the sixth house, nothing, nothing at all.
Nice. So
So yeah,
the big turning point is just there's been a lot of turnover and you've had lots of new colleagues then that you're working with, or lots of new people working there. And I mean, are you in a managerial position yourself?
no, as a night person, I sort of like function as the one that knows everybody else. So I'm not administratively in any superior position, but people come to me and they say, "But you're not leaving also, not for the next few years." And I say, "No, that's not in the plan." So um, I do have a status because I've been there for such a long time,
Mhm.
and I know the parents and they know me, and so we have like a working relationship that's quite good.
Okay. So I guess
And
the main,
I welcome the new leadership. I think it's fine. It's fine with me, at least.
yeah, it sounds like that was the main thing is just there's been some positive changes in your workplace with the new leadership. And you also wrote that you've made journaling contributions pertaining to actions to be taken concerning individual residents. So you're
Yeah.
taking an active role in helping to make sure that like patient care is done well.
Yes.
Got
And
it.
that we
All right.
don't, that we can keep a standard that's bearable for everybody.
Mhm.
Yeah, because
Real-
institutions have been like terrible for many years, like sort of all around. But
y- Yeah, I mean, it seems like improving that has been part of your life's work and your destiny
yeah,
here with the ruler of the ascendant in the sixth.
yeah,
That's brilliant. And then the last thing is you said in your write-up that you've been supporting a couple of people who were diagnosed with terminal cancer,
yeah,
but that both of them have seen a remission and an improvement.
yes, that's right. Yeah.
Were those like patients or were those friends?
One is a friend of a friend who contacted me, asked for my phone number, which I gave, of course, and because I have a thing with motivation. I don't motivate people. Um, they can ask me, and then I'll do whatever I can. And so I've had a few healing sessions with the one that's in remission. The other one is a member of a meditation group I'm in, that I've been a member of since 2006. And she's been a member there for about 8-9 years. And she's been on to her doctor for a long time, to have consultation, and he's sort of been stalling her. And then she finally managed to push through. And it turns out that she has 2 tumors, one in the breast and one in the uterus, and a cancerous gut. So now that we are like 1 month into the whole process of that, she too is in remission, and she says doctors have told her that they'll be able to keep her alive. And I think we can also make her better, have a life, not just keep her alive, but have a life again. That's
Good,
the hope. Yeah.
good. And that, I guess that was the last piece, as you said, you've taken classes in healing and
Yeah.
especially using the Buddhist chakra system as a tool.
Yeah, and it's a whole thing that's called the body mirror system, that sort of has as a pretext that everything that happens to you, also along the line of illnesses, it starts in your consciousness, and you can read it in the aura. And this is why we use the chakras to sort of balance the chakras. Once you balance the chakras, illness stops.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
it's pretty simple, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. So it just sounds like on a number of different levels that like health and healing and trying to help people has been just a major part of your life focus, which is just really
Yeah.
beautiful in terms of that placement of the ruler of your ascendant, and the ruler of the ascendant representing something about the native's overall life direction and focus in life's work.
I've definitely come to terms with that. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Good. All right.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that is a great example. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right.
Right.
All right. So, yeah, that was a really good example also because it really tied in the ruler of the ascendant, and just I just did an entire webinar yesterday like this where we read charts from with students of my Hellenistic astrology course, where we went through and talked about the placement of the ruler of the ascendant and went through each of the houses and took examples of people sharing their life story as it related to that placement. And it just became really clear that whatever house the ruler of the ascendant is located in, that the topics of that house become abnormally important in that person's life in some way, especially in terms of setting the life direction and focus of the life in different ways. So this was a really good example of that, but I did dozens of examples like that just yesterday. So it was cool to see one here today and see how sometimes something like a Jupiter transit can reinvigorate or affirm whatever that placement is in really significant ways. All right. Let me see where we're at now. So one of the people, don't think is here, but it was a good example, so I'll share it really quickly. So there was one patron named Nataliya who had Jupiter transit their 9th house. And this was the description. They said, Jupiter transited my 9th house, conjoined my Mercury and Sun, and trined my ascendant. International travel to India and Russia, spiritual awakening, and belief in God. Also, there were 3 court cases with multiple hearings, and eventually I won all 3. I've been through multiple dangerous situations and got out unharmed. Reconnected with my family. Jupiter rules my 4th after not seeing or speaking with them for 30 years, and much more. So I thought that was a really good example of the travel, of the religious aspect that sometimes comes up with the 9th house, but also the 3 court cases, being victorious in 3 court cases. That's also actually really important. And I was reminded of court cases being relevant recently because, recently in the news, Trump was in the news for having lost that court case and being convicted a few days ago, and transiting Mars was going through his 9th house, where it squared his natal Saturn in the 12th house, and Saturn was the lord of the year via annual profections. So it's like on the one hand, you get the example of Trump, who lost a court case or was convicted. So he had a negative thing happen when the most difficult planet in his chart was transiting his ninth house, with the ninth house representing the courts and the law. But then also with Nataliya's case, we get the other end of that spectrum, which is having the most positive transit possible, which is Jupiter in a day chart going through the ninth house, or Venus in a night chart going through the ninth house, especially Venus retrograde, and then having success in terms of the courts, or actually winning a court case being the other side of that, having victory when it comes to that. Yeah, so I thought that was a good example. All right. So I don't know if this person is attending. Okay, it doesn't look like it. So I'll just read this one really quickly. So Victoria has Libra rising. So Taurus is the 8th whole sign house, which is the place of shared resources, debt, other people's money, can also be inheritance. Victoria wrote, Jupiter transited my 8th house, and the biggest thing I noticed was accumulating shared debt for the first time in my life. I made several larger purchases with someone else during this transit. Another thing that happened during Jupiter's time in Taurus was an opportunity to make extra income by getting paid for something I was already doing. I've been a caretaker for my mom for several years. So I thought that was a really good example, because that's some of the more positive sides of the 8th house. Um, on the one hand, accumulating debt, because this is a night chart. So sometimes the night chart Jupiter transits, you can get some of the downsides of Jupiter, which can be things going to excess, or doing something really big, or taking on something really big. In this instance, it was accumulating debt with a partner, but also making large purchases together, which is, potentially a positive thing depending on what you're purchasing. And then the other part was developing extra money or income as a result of working for or working with together with somebody else. So having the financial benefits that come through an 8th house transit is a very common one as well. So I thought that was a good example of some positive things that you can kind of expect even when you get transits through otherwise what can sometimes be difficult houses, like the 6th or the 8th or the 12th. All right, so let me see who is next. Who else submitted a story that's here in the live chat or has showed up just recently? Let me know in the live chat. Okay. Yeah, I think I wrote yours down as a good one, Julie, if you're up to join me on video. Hey.
Hi, Chris. Nice to see you.
Yeah, thank you for joining me. You have a
Sure.
nice spot outside today. It looks like a nice day.
Yes, the ocean is calm today. We're not having any major royals.
Nice. What is your birth data?
March 11th, 1954.
What time?
3, I guess 50 p.m., but it's probably a couple minutes earlier.
And what place?
Brooklyn, New York.
Okay. Is your ascendant about 26 Leo?
Correct.
All right. Here's your chart. And so you have Leo rising, Taurus is your 10th whole sign house, and the degree of your midheaven is there. And yeah, what happened with you in terms of 10th house things?
For most of my life, I've been working as a fisherman or with fishermen or writing about fishermen, and my career kind of took an upward trajectory last year as I was appointed to a few advisory panels. Many people don't know a lot about the ocean unless they live near it or work on it. But there's a lot of problems going on with our waters. So I think my whole life working in this sector, and that's only one thing I've done in my life, but is starting to pay off in my 10th house with the transit. So and I look forward to even more as I have my natal Jupiter in Gemini now, with the Gemini ingress. So but that wasn't the only thing. I've also had, major surgery. I did write a couple of things down. And financially, things that I've invested in are doing well. I'm
So with
considering yeah.
so one of the things, just to focus in on it, is you said you're appointed to a committee that advises federal and state agencies on a specific fish because of elements regarding ocean-based issues that have been overlooked by the agencies but brought forward by you. So you're actually appointed to like a federal a committee that advises a federal agency. That seems like a pretty major deal.
It is. I mean, it's kind of a breakthrough thing, because you can, be around the stuff and participating, but never be actually recognized. And this has a very long history in my life, because of my late husband was, we were both fishermen. We both worked in the industry as commercial and charter boat people here on Eastern Long Island, and so it's a kind of a culminating appointment. And I go to these meetings and it's very official, not to, no pun intended, but
Yeah.
um,
Is it something you are passionate about? It sounds like it's something you're passionate about and something that you've focused on for many years, so that it's probably good now to be in a position where you can do more about it than you could before.
it is, and you'd be surprised how political fishery issues can be. States are always fighting for allocation and quota. It has international ramifications because the federal government uses permits as a granting favors to other countries that come into our federal waters and take more than they should be taking out and leaving very little for our local fishermen. And also, a passion of mine has always been how people use the ocean for dumping everything that they don't want on land. And it's most of us have too much plastic in our bodies because of this. You think about all the pharmaceuticals that get flushed down the toilet bowl and end up in all rivers lead to the ocean. If the ocean dies, we die. This is kind of like my mantra.
Yeah,
So
I love that. You have so many water placements, but just having Leo rising and the ruler of the ascendant being the sun in Pisces in the eighth house and having that sextile your midheaven at 19 degrees of Taurus really focuses in on that. And seeing that it's in the eighth house, which is like shared resources or the partner's finances. You said your partner was a fisherman.
well, we were both fishermen. When I was 20 years old, I met my husband in Brooklyn. And he would take me fishing at night. We were going fishing for striped bass, which was a big money fish. And since then, it's highly regulated because of PCB content. So that was like the beginning of it all. But I thought I was going on a date, and what I really was becoming what they call pulling for the boat. I was pulling fish in to sell, and I used
Nice.
to stand on street corners in Brooklyn and sell fish.
Wow,
As
that's amazing.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Brooklyn, so you do a lot of stuff that probably people would think were very brave, but it was just normal for us.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, that's really cool though, and it ties together just the grand air or grand water trine that you have in your chart with the sun at 20 Pisces and Mercury also in Pisces, and then Uranus in Cancer, and then Saturn and the IC in Scorpio. Um, but the some of the environmental focus I feel like is coming through from your Taurus midheaven and that Taurus 10th house, and it seems like that's part of what came out with this Jupiter transit for you was the ability to maybe do more about it now or have a greater impact on some of the environmental stuff than you have been able to have previously?
Well, I don't know how many people are aware of it unless you live on the coasts. But, we have a new industry that they consider green, which is, putting wind turbines in the ocean. And what it's doing is putting fishermen out of business. It's also um, um, causing a lot of problems for ground fish like fluke and flounder that live on the bottom and spawn there. Sharks and other kinds of fish will not cross these huge electrical cables that they bring through the ocean bed and up into the land. So we know this here because we were the first place that it happened, and I've been very much involved in it, and it's kind of like you want to see things work well and not pollute the environment, but there's always a trade-off, and whether this trade-off is cost effective or the risk is worth the benefit, we won't know. But for the fishing community, it's really not worth it.
Sure, sure.
Don't hate me, please. All you people like green energy.
All right. And then the last thing is just, I thought yours was a good example of also of the transition from one house to another, from the 10th house to Jupiter going into your 11th house, because you mentioned specifically that you want to build a community of like-minded people. And it seems like that is really reminiscent of Jupiter going into your 11th house in Gemini, where it's going to meet up with your natal Jupiter, which is in the 11th house in Gemini, along with your moon. So, what is that community element that you're kind of anticipating that might develop over the next year?
Well, I'll have to sell my house in order to buy this piece of property, which is like 23 acres, and deal with zoning issues in the Chesapeake Bay area. But we're not looking to make a lot of houses, but maybe, some of these tiny houses you hear about, and just have a community where people who are interested in the same thing, ocean, growing great vegetables, and herbs and taking care of each other as we get older. So this has kind of always been something I've been interested in, which, I never thought it was within my grasp. But my house, I don't know how many of you know about the Hamptons, but I live in a place called Montauk, New York now, which is at the very, very end of Long Island. Next stop is Portugal. But I can sell my house and perhaps actually do this, which is kind of amazing. And I think if it's going to happen, it's going to happen within the next year.
Nice. Awesome. Um, all right. Well, the last thing is just I noticed like your sun is at 20 Pisces, and that's the ruler of your ascendant. And I'm noticing that just because I know, Austin's sun is near there, and it's interesting how Saturn stationed there recently, or is hovering around those degrees, and it's stationing this month. But it's interesting then that you've gained more of an authority position and more of a role that's pretty serious in terms of some of this stuff. But we've talked so much in the forecast episodes over the past year about how there's been environmental issues with water, there's been pollution issues, and other things like that. And so it's interesting, I'm realizing there's people sometimes with Pisces placements that are directly involved in trying to help or fix some of those things, and you're having those transits now to your chart, and then people like you are getting involved in trying to fix them. So it's actually really interesting to reflect on that and why it's so important for you since it's the ruler of your ascendant.
Austin's like my almost astrological twin, and I connect with him on many different levels. He's brilliant, like as are you, and I enjoy your podcast tremendously. But the Saturn thing, always kind of scares me a little because it's in the fourth house, and as far as what's that's the part of my chart that is I'm a little nervous about, but I think that Pisces, it'll eventually get to my sun sign, I think next year, at some point in March. But I think that the structure it gives is important, and I think at some point it may provide beneficial parts of what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, for sure. Well, just taking a more of a leadership role in things now seems to be a part of that, but that seems like a really constructive. It's kind of like, Austin was expressing on this past forecast episode we just released a few days ago, how part of that transit for him is now he's a father all of a sudden, and part of his reflection on that is feeling like he's in a position where he's got to be more serious, and he's the one that's in charge and has to like take care of people, and that's a much different role that he hadn't had to do up to this point. And in a similar way with some of these appointments, like you're in more of a leadership role and have more influence over things than maybe you had up to this point, which is a lot more responsibility. I guess that's the key word, is responsibility.
Yeah, I'm also trying to get. I mean, excuse me. I'm doing readings, and I'm also writing. That's another thing that happened. I'm writing an astrological column in a local paper here, so I'm like super busy, But this is my passion. The astrology is my passion. I mean, the other stuff is like just been the background music of my life. But I mean, this Jupiter coming into the 11th house for me, is that my Jupiter return, or
Yeah, it'll be your Jupiter return.
right? So it's even bigger than, you know, I should probably read a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it'll definitely be some big stuff this year as it goes into that. So it'll be fun to check in. Maybe we can check in a year or further into that transit and see how it's going and how things have played out for you.
I would love to do that. Thank you, Chris.
Cool. All right. Thanks for joining me and thanks for sharing your example. I appreciate it.
No problem.
All right. All right. That was great. Let me see what's going on with the live chat. Um, Elisabeth thanks Julie for your due diligence and efforts. Jade says some astrologers consider the 11th house a money house. That's true. Um, Carly says, I feel that as someone who has their Saturn in the fourth house as well, I think of it as a teacher, though my struggles with home have informed a lot of my gratitude with the topic. Yeah. All right. Awesome. All right. Well, we've been going for an hour, so I'm going to take a little few-minute break to run and grab a drink, and then I'll be right back and we'll keep going and go through as many more examples as we can get through in the next hour. All right, so I did want to mention here during the break that I'm actually doing a sale on my Hellenistic astrology course where it's 15% off this month if you use the discount code Mercury. So I do webinars each month, just like this one, where I do live chart readings with the course, where we go through and we apply different techniques that are taught during the course of the online course to different people's charts through a live Zoom session. So my Hellenistic course is an online course in ancient astrology. It's suitable for beginner, intermediate, and advanced students because I take people from basic concepts for reading birth charts all the way up through intermediate and advanced techniques, including timing techniques such as transits, annual profections, and zodiac releasing. So there's over 100 hours of video lectures, and the course is divided into 13 portions. And the primary focus is just teaching you how to read birth charts in the same style as the way that I read birth charts. So if that's something you're interested in, it's always nice, with the podcast, I put out so much free content, but I actually always keep a lot back for my courses because that's where I really go into much more detail with different techniques and use a lot more chart examples so that it's a lot more hands-on and sort of practical in terms of teaching people my method of astrology and kind of initiating them into my lineage of astrology as well, which is one of the cool things about the course is once you go through all the course, at the very end, there's a final written test. And if a person successfully passes the test, they receive a certificate of completion that they successfully passed my Hellenistic astrology course and that they have a strong foundation in ancient astrology. So if you're interested in learning my methods and sort of becoming part of that lineage, then look into it because I pretty much never do sales on the Hellenistic astrology course. So this is a very rare opportunity to get in with a pretty sizable discount of 15%, which is more than $100 off the course, just by using that promo code Mercury. So you can find out more information at theastrologyschool.com. All right, let's get back into reading charts here. So let me see who else is available, and I should also go through and keep reading some as well that were sent in. Yeah, the promo code is for June, and the promo code runs until June 15th. All right, let me find the Q&A and see what's been submitted there. I don't think I've done a second house one so far, have I? I don't think so. Elisabeth, are you still here? Elisabeth O'Rourke? Hey, thanks for joining me.
I have like fan blush.
That's all right. All right. What's your birth data?
But I'm full of gratitude for all your work and everything that you share with the community. Like, you're a big person, and it's really fun to be here today.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
So my data is July 8th, 1965,
July.
12:07 a.m., Quebec City, Canada.
Is your ascendant 12 Aries?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. Here we go. So you have Aries rising. It's a night chart. Jupiter. What you said in the live chat is last year you had a pretty good year for health, and this year it's been a really good year for finances.
Right. And maybe I can set it up this way. I know you've talked about the 8th house representing inheritance and sometimes death.
Mhm.
And my ruler is, the moon is in the 8th house. And I was born last, a family of 7. But there were 2 of my siblings that passed away before I was born. And I lost another sister in 2016 and another one in 2018. So out of 5 girls in my family, I'm the only one left.
Oh, wow.
So I was kind of born into that, like I inherited sort of a death house, if you would. So it's part of my life, without it being, it's just part of reality, right? Death is part of reality. So it's not like I'm crying all the time. It's just part of the dynamic. But then there were other people that died along the way. My father, I lost 3 brother-in-laws. I lost 2 sister-in-laws. I lost Pat, lost a good friend. And it had a real cumulative effect on me. So my energy level was kind of completely down, I think. Like, by the time I think Jupiter was in the 12th, was it in Pisces? Yeah, I didn't have much energy. I had enough to do my work, which is never a problem, and I had enough to do domestic tasks. That's never a problem either. But when Jupiter ingressed into Aries, it was like May 15th, and it was all of a sudden, it's like I just felt this burst of energy, and I just wanted to just get up and go. And I signed on to like a diet program, and I put on my running shoes and I went running, and then I, like little by little, it's just kind of my life changed in that year, and just my energy level all came back. And so that was Jupiter transiting through Aries.
Nice. Yeah, that contrast, especially after going through, like a heavy 12th house transit the previous year,
Yeah.
where you have your natal Saturn there in Pisces. I can see why that would be such a huge difference having Jupiter move into your first house.
Yeah. And, I've always had a lot of energy, but sometimes the energy to take care of your physical health is not there. And it was really tangible. It was like, sort of night and day at that moment. And I think May 15th was probably pretty close to when it ingressed in 2022.
Yeah.
And then we went through kind of another tough period in 2022. It's probably around some of the eclipse, and I know there was some retrograde with Venus and Mars, but my daughter had a miscarriage. I lost another sister-in-law to sepsis after she broke her ankle, and my husband was diagnosed with cancer. And We didn't know how far the cancer was in, so we had to schedule a surgery, and I scheduled the surgery for October 25th, 2022 at 1 p.m. in Boston, which I think was the exact moment of an eclipse.
Right. That would have been one of the Taurus or Scorpio eclipses, right?
Right. And so I didn't know if I made the biggest mistake of my life, or if it was going to be, like you say, it could be great ending, great beginning. So I don't know, maybe he's going to die of sepsis, like two of his siblings on the table or whatever. But I think it was successful. He's in remission now, full remission.
Good.
And the week after that, we went to look at a piece of real estate because he couldn't do much. So we went to look at a piece of real estate, far away from where we are, maybe for a second home. And got connected with a realtor, and eventually somebody made an offer on a property that we had. We ended up buying that other property. And I went and looked at it. I think the first time it was April 20th, 2023, which was, I think, eclipse and Jupiter moving into Taurus.
Right. Yeah.
And
April 20th, 2023. So that would be right during eclipse season
yeah,
when they were still happening in Taurus and Jupiter going into your second house.
right. And it was like love at first sight. Like when I was there, I was just, just feeling amazing about the place, about what we had done. And then at the same time, that's when he was done with his chemo. And then our business really picked up, and it was sort of everything was abundant, it seemed like, in terms of like materially and work-wise and health-wise. So it's been a great time, I think, having that in Taurus, and I'm sorry to see it go, but I do have Jupiter and Gemini in my birth chart.
Mhm.
So how would you interpret that? Like if it's a return, if it's in Gemini? I know it's not a good position usually for Jupiter, but
Sure. Yeah. So you're having a Jupiter return. It's going into your third house of communication, short distance travel. It's also the place of siblings. So it's activating some of that as well. What else? Jupiter is ruling the ninth house of religion and philosophy, education, travel, as well as the 12th house, which is sometimes a place of grief or isolation or other things like that. It's kind of interesting because this is a recurrence transit for you because Jupiter's going through in your natal chart. Jupiter's in Gemini and Saturn's in Pisces. So that's, what's going to be repeated this year.
my
In
daughter's pregnant, and she's expected to give birth in September, early September.
Nice. September's. That's okay. Got it. And then with one of the things just with the Jupiter transit through your third house is are all of the things in terms of not just, I guess, partially the grieving process, but are all of the practical things kind of tied up at this point or finished in terms of your siblings and in terms of what happened in terms of their end of life stuff, or where are you at with all of that?
Well, my mother is still alive. She's 98. So I assume she's going to pass at some point. She's still relatively healthy, but yeah, so.
Sure. Yeah, I guess I was just curious if sometimes during third house transits, things related to either like siblings, neighbors, like cousins or extended relatives can come up as like a theme. So I was just curious if like what possible scenarios there could be if there were any sibling things that come up. And sometimes that can be like in one of our earlier examples with the fourth house transits, there were some ways in which the legacy of the person's father came up during some fourth house transits. So I was just thinking about that as a scenario here for you in terms of, a year of third house transits.
Yeah, I think I can't think of anything like that now. Just again, just maybe more so my mother, who's really elderly at this point, but still around for the time being.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that's, your Jupiter transits over the past few years have been really good so far in terms of your first house and third house. So
Yeah.
Yeah, that should be a continuation into your third house, and maybe just like some learning some new things or starting a new educational routine, just because Jupiter is the ruler of your ninth house of education and philosophy and travel. And there's something about the natal potential of that placement when we have a Jupiter return that oftentimes gets unlocked.
Right.
So sometimes with like the ruler of the ninth and the third, it can be about learning how to communicate what you've learned or to communicate your personal philosophy and put it out there into the world, and the tension between those two things.
Right. And I've been thinking about taking Spanish, so maybe I'll try to put that forward.
Yeah, that would be a great Jupiter transit through your third house. Do you know any other languages?
My first language is French and maybe a little bit of Italian.
Okay, so you're already bilingual, right? Because you grew up, you were born in Quebec, so you
Right.
probably learned both languages early on.
But yeah, French mostly. But then I moved to the United States when I was 18. So that's when I learned English.
When you're 18. Okay. I mean, because your English is like impeccable, so you've learned it like very well, to have like both of those languages fluently.
Yeah, thank you. My parents used to speak English when they didn't want us to understand what they were saying. So
Nice. Yeah. So you gotta find a way around that.
yeah,
Well,
exactly. Yeah, better learn that language quickly.
it's just interesting because sometimes, mutable signs, traditionally they were said to indicate two of whatever they indicate. So it's interesting that you've had two primary, basically main languages that you've learned at this point.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks for sharing that example. That's a really great second
Yeah.
house example, and also
Yeah,
just
and
showing.
and I thought of you of obviously when that happened, and you were saying, "Oh, this will be a good year for physical health or something." I was like, "Oh, he was right on."
Right. Yeah, during the Aries horoscope, that's usually what I talk about with first house transits like that. And then the second house and just yeah, money and finances being
Mhm.
the area that grows.
Yeah, you were on the nose.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Chris.
All right. That's a great example. There's definitely, I would have wanted to go into more. Um, and maybe we'll have to do sort of like a broader chart reading to get into like full chart analysis. Could be one of our follow-up ones if people are interested. All right. Let me scroll through and see where we're at. Let me see if I have any other that I really meant to read, and I'll see if those people are here, because I had so many good written submissions. I'd like to get through some of those. So Debbie has Scorpio rising, so Taurus is their seventh house of relationships. Debbie says, during this transit, my partner's work and role expanded beyond expectations. He spent the majority of the last year away on business related to travel. I was anticipating something growing in our relationship, but Patrick Watson delineated it with great and surprising accuracy. As he said last July, Jupiter's transit in the seventh house, quote, that speaks to me of freedom, end quote. And so it turned out to be. As a Leo rising, Jupiter is okay. So her husband is Leo rising, so Jupiter is transiting his 10th house. So he was the one that was away on work and business related travel. And then Patrick was probably delineating that Jupiter transit as pertaining more to freedom, because Jupiter would be meeting up with and conjoining Uranus and Taurus in the seventh house. So that makes a lot of sense. And that was a good call on Patrick's part. And that was definitely something that was tricky with this Jupiter transit, just because that conjunction would take place. And sometimes both Jupiter and Uranus can indicate or have this impulse towards freedom or lack of restrictions or lack of boundaries or sometimes distance. So I could see how that would come out in terms of seventh house placement, seventh house transit. So Carly in the live chat says, Debbie and I had similar experiences. I have Jupiter in Taurus, and I spent 9 months living in a dorm where no one knew my partner. It was the first time in over a decade. I was just Carly and not Carly, Nick's spouse. That's pretty amazing. What's your rising sign? Scorpio. Okay. Would you like to share that example and come on and do the live chat? So, and while I'm waiting, just a quick note that this is a new thing that I'm doing of doing these live chart readings with patrons of the Astrology Podcast and people that are signed up for the live stream tier.
Hello?
Oh, hey, Carly.
I don't know what happened. My phone just said absolutely not and shut down. But
No,
hello there.
no problem. I'm glad it worked out. All right. So what is your birth data?
May 21st, 1991 at, what was it, 6:47 p.m. in Chicago, Illinois.
All right. You have 15 Scorpio rising.
Yes.
All right. So this Jupiter transit and the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction took place in your seventh house of relationships. So tell me about that.
So my husband travels for work. That part's not new, but what was new and what I thought of when you were talking about the previous example was I ended up living in a dormitory for school, which I'm a little bit older and definitely not something that I had ever anticipated happening in my 30s. But I decided to go back to school. Just had a ninth house perfection year also. So that part,
Right.
I going back to school, I knew, but it was, like I was saying in the chat, really interesting to have the experience of just being myself and nobody knowing my partner, as opposed to the previous 12 years of my life. I've been married. I've always been known as someone's partner. So it was a very liberating kind of experience.
All right, several questions. That's really interesting. One, 12 years. When did you get married? Or when did that relationship
20,
start?
we got married June of 2012. I know I was thinking about like the Jupiter return of our
Jupiter.
relationship.
Or
Yeah.
yeah, the last time Jupiter was in Taurus, roughly.
Mm-hmm. We did meet in high school and we started dating prior to that. So we started dating in 2010, but we had met years before that. So
Okay, got it. But you got married sometime around 2012?
yeah, June 27th, 2012.
2012. Okay, that's cool. So, and then 12 years. Second question, you said your husband travels a lot for work. And I'm just looking at that, the ruler of the ascendant in the ninth house of travel, or the ruler of the seventh house of relationships in the ninth house of travel. Could you expand on that and what does he do, or how is travel integrated into his work?
So in April of 2018, he took a job after being recommended by his friend, which is super funny because he has the ruler of his 10th and the 11th. But he started this job that is 100% travel. To It's a really like made up sounding position, but basically he goes and troubleshoots conveyor systems for different warehouses for companies like Walmart or Amazon. So he's traveling across the country and sometimes out of the country in order to go to these different sites and troubleshoot those systems. And for the first 3 years or so of him doing that, 2018, 2019, and 2020, I traveled with him. And then in 2021, I decided to stop traveling with him because I didn't want to do it anymore.
Okay, that's amazing. So that started in he got that job in 2018. So that would be not long after Uranus first moved into Taurus.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, that's really cool. So that's just bringing up a broader, not issue, but something we've talked about earlier, where in trying to talk about this Jupiter transit, it's often taking place within the context of the larger changes and sometimes the radical changes that have taken place over the past, what is it, 6, 7 years now since Uranus has been transiting through that house and through the Taurus house of everyone's charts, and just some of the major changes that that's brought with it. And here the Jupiter transit came through and kind of affirmed some of those things.
Yeah. And it's been interesting now to see as Jupiter has moved into Gemini, we're in the process of buying a house. So very much on brand with themes of debt.
Got it. Right. So will this be your first house?
Yes. Yeah. So good debt.
Yeah, good debt, but definitely that's a big like financial commitment that you're sort of like taking together and also taking out a big loan for that with Jupiter going into the eighth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice. All right. I was trying to think of anything else. There's something else that I meant to mention, but I think all of that's pretty. Oh yeah, you said you went back to school, and I just thought that was interesting also in terms of just the ruler of your ascendant in the ninth. What are you going back to school for?
Public policy. It's technically social relations and public policy, but the idea is in 2018, alongside when he started his job, that was kind of the moment where I went, gosh, well, what do I want to do? And I decided, okay, I'm going to go back to school to help make the world a better place. As lofty as that sounds, but really a lot of focus on environmental justice and climate change, things like that. And I plan on
Nice.
going into, with public policy, hopefully writing policy and law that can help improve those things.
Nice. That's amazing. So part of, and then that's why you were living in the dorm, which was indicating the greater distance and freedom. And also, I mean, that really brings up two things, both this Jupiter transit and the way you described it, but also the Uranus transit starting back in 2018, which is anytime something goes into the seventh house, it also starts opposing the first house. So sometimes it's like changes with the partner result in also reflections on who am I and what am I doing and like what is my identity, especially um outside of the relationships or like do I have an independent identity versus how much is my identity subsumed within the relationship itself. And it sounds like in both of those instances, that sort of like come up for you in different ways with these two Taurus transits.
Oh, absolutely. Especially, I hadn't even connected Uranus before like this, but it makes great sense because the identity of being a wife is super different than the identity that I'm developing as a person now. And I was actually in gender inclusive housing when I was in the dormitory. So all of a sudden I got to examine the concept of gender in a way that I didn't feel like allowed to before. Not to say my husband, when he would be totally cool with it, but it never occurred to me because it wasn't really like a super relevant component of our relationship. And now
Mhm.
suddenly I was in this space where this kind of unconventional form of identification started to really appeal to me. And that's when I decided to start using she, they pronouns. So that is like so on brand.
Nice. Yeah, that's also very identity related and like self related because the first house, that's one of the things I've always struggled with the most to explain the first house because we have that keyword of like self or identity, but that sounds like a very abstract thing to attempt to explain to somebody until you've actually experienced a transit that's hit the first house and all of a sudden there's something about yourself or your identity or your sense of who you are or how you present yourself to the world that changes and sometimes that can be a really major change for some people or at least even a moderate one, but it's hard to explain until you've gone through some sort of transit like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And now I'm thinking, not to take up too much of your time, but one of the eclipses that occurred in Scorpio was so close to my ascendant, and it was the day after I had graduated associate college or community college and got my associates. So that kind of like moment of identity shifting of like, okay, I'm not doing this anymore. What's next? I guess I'm going to become a university student.
Nice. Right. So that's that whole component of eclipses taking place over the past couple of years between your first house of self and your seventh house of relationships. And then the ruler of your first house of self is in the ninth house of education. So it's like you're being pulled towards almost like a magnet, the sort of educational route in life. And sometimes your first house transits are responding to that or that's where they're sort of directed towards.
100%. Absolutely.
Very cool. Very cool. All right, awesome. Thank you for sharing that example. That's a really good example. I'm glad you were here because I wanted to talk to somebody, about that and having that previous example that I read, but being able to talk to you about it directly, you just get so much more information. So that was super interesting. Thank you.
My pleasure, Chris. Thank you so much.
All right. All right, awesome. And that actually brings up, I had somebody on the other side of that had a first house Jupiter transit. Is Cherokee here in the audience? No. Okay, so I'll just share this one. It's actually a very brief one, but it was interesting because it's the other side of that where, and people can tell me if they have one of these experiences so far. But Cherokee wrote in saying, Jupiter transiting the first house with Taurus rising in their birth chart, they said, I got married and was very happy to change my name and also very excited to take on my new identity as a wife. So again, that first house concept of like self and identity, which sounds very abstract sometimes until you actually have a major first house transit, and then all of a sudden there's some sort of shift or there's some sort of change to your identity. In that instance, it's about um, a change of name and a change of identity and a change also in terms of like relationship with another person. And suddenly you're not just acting on your own, but now you're acting as part of a unit of two people, and you get that not tension, but that balance between the first house and the seventh house. And it's always so fascinating to see people who are going through major first house or seventh house transits have that give and take and that back and forth between that axis. So yeah, those are some great examples. All right, let me see where we're at in terms of other ones I meant to read, and if anybody has an example like that, they can let me know. Okay, so one of them that came in that was written was by Marissa, who said, Jupiter was in my second house. Some of my housemates moved out and I needed to make more money to cover costs. I was finishing my post-grad training in sex therapy and was ready to expand my couples therapy business. Over the transit, my business income more than doubled. So this was Marissa has Aries rising, so Jupiter was transiting through Taurus and through the second house of money and personal finances. And then it was opposing the moon in Scorpio, which is pretty cool in terms of the topics and stuff, and indicating like an increase in income. So sometimes that's one of the things that's interesting about benefic transits is sometimes there can be something that precipitates the change that forces you to have to, start expending more energy or more effort in that area of your life. But sometimes the results ultimately can be positive. So you have to kind of pay attention to that when it's happening, because it may be pushing you in the direction of doing something that will be positive, even if there's like a delayed result. So Bethany says, first house, yes, my Taurus rising daughter had one of those horrible Venus retro breakups after a long relationship. She's had to adjust to being single, but it's all been for the best. Jupiter is kind that way. Yeah, that makes sense. And then restructuring sometimes what it's like to be on your own can sometimes be a major part of a first house transit. All right. I'm just going to go through the rest. So there's a listener named Shannon who had a third house Jupiter transit. I don't think they're here. Here is the description that was sent in. Shannon said, Jupiter transiting my third house. For the first time since 2020, I started going into the office again. I'm trying to get to know my neighbors. I made some new friends and we decided to have a monthly dinner. Most importantly, Jupiter was conjunct my Chiron. I used to consider myself a writer, but my private diaries were violated on several occasions. For decades, I couldn't bring myself to write again because I was afraid someone would find it and I'd be judged for it. Only now have I somehow been able to overcome that fear and start writing again. So I thought that was an amazing example, and the idea of, having experienced something traumatic earlier in a person's life related to the third house and related to communication that inhibited communicating or inhibited you writing for a period of time. But then having a benefic transit sometimes come through that house can either ameliorate or help to improve or solve or fix some of the issues that were set up there previously. And that was actually something that came up. I noticed a number of times. There were some people who had the Jupiter transit, but then they had a negative health issue. But then through medical intervention, they were actually able to fix the health issue, which I think was part of the lesson from that, is that sometimes the benefic transit is indicating the ability to recover from something, as opposed to the opposite scenario, which is, imagine some medical thing happens and you don't catch it in time, and therefore it's the worst case scenario. That's the worst case scenario, whereas sometimes a benefic transit is actually getting lucky and catching something in time. And I think there was a couple of examples like that that I'll pull up here later. But this one was a good example of a difficulty with communicating that was then rectified through a third house transit. So I really appreciated that one. So thanks for sharing it. All right. So let me see who else is here. Would like to share another live example. But I'd like to do a house that we haven't done before at this point. Any Gemini rising examples? We haven't so far. Does anybody have a Gemini rising example? That would be a 12th house transit. Maybe I should pull up the two health ones though. Okay, so one of them was a Jupiter transit with a Taurus rising native named Sunny. I don't see them in the room, so I'll just read it. So it's a chart with Taurus rising. And they said, Jupiter transited my first house, and after many tries, I finally got a diagnosis of lung cancer. It turned out to be 3 different types of cancer, but all stage 1 and very small tumors. I received surgery on April 10th, removing a part of my right lung and hopefully leaving me cancer-free. So I thought that was an important example, because, like I said, sometimes I was thinking about a different scenario where the worst case scenario is not catching a cancer and instead it becoming either not operable or becoming terminal, as opposed to the scenario where something is caught early enough that a person's able to do something about it, hopefully go into remission, and then hopefully, still live a long and healthy life after that. So that was one of the things I thought about when it came to that example. And Sunny has Jupiter in the first house opposite Mars and Scorpio in the 7th house, and both of them are square to Pluto in the 4th house. So some of the Jupiter transit was unlocking some things in the natal chart that were kind of tricky or difficult, but there was still some positive things that came of it as well, in terms of receiving some help or some healing from that. So I think there was another one like that from Janice. Janice, I think, are you here? Do you want to share your story? Hey, can you hear me?
Hey, Chris, how are you?
Hey, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so what is your birth data?
January 15th, 1971, 12:53 p.m.,
And where?
Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Is your ascendant 17 Taurus?
Yes.
All right. So here's your chart. So you have Taurus rising, and Saturn is natally in the first house. It's conjunct the ascendant at 15 degrees of Taurus to the ascendant at 17. And then I thought yours was an interesting case because it was similar to Sunny's, where you also have Mars and Scorpio in the 7th house. So that's also getting activated. So what's been going on with you, or what's this Jupiter and Taurus transit been about?
So, before it happened, I had read a lot about it, and most of what I read was, well, be careful of weight gain, but it's mostly going to be positive. But I've had a lot of health issues, some reproductive health issues really became concerning around the Scorpio eclipse in November of 2023. And I had to have a hysterectomy in January of this year because of some concerning test results, but the diagnosis wasn't cancer. And so it's kind of like what you just said. It was the outcome was positive. It could have been much worse, but I'm kind of dealing with some lingering health effects, like some very bad arthritis that's kind of been exacerbated by the hysterectomy. But all in all, feeling extremely fortunate, given what I went through, which was a pretty major surgery.
Yeah. When did the surgery happen?
January 10th, 2024.
10th. Okay. What were I'm trying to think of what the transits were then. So it happened then kind of at the midpoint between the two eclipse seasons. If and you said it was during the Scorpio eclipse around that time in 2022 or 2023 that you first started finding out about some of this?
So I definitely was going through more minor procedures in 2022, but in 2023 in November, I think that was the last Scorpio eclipse.
It was actually Taurus, so it would have been in your first
Oh,
house.
oh, sorry, Taurus. That's when I got some concerning test results that kind of quickly made the major surgery happen.
Got it. Okay. So, and then you scheduled it basically for as soon after that as you could do.
Yes, yeah.
Let me actually check that. Actually, now I just remembered Jupiter was stationing in January. So let's run your transits. When was the surgery again?
January 10th, 2024.
Okay, so here's your chart with a bi-wheel. I'm gonna back it up to January 10th, 2024. Yeah, so Jupiter had just stationed direct in early Taurus, just like a week earlier, if even that, in your first house. And then it looks like Uranus, right? So Uranus would have stationed maybe a few days, maybe a week or something. Yeah, like a week or two later. So Uranus had backed up to 29 degree or to 19 degrees of Taurus and was stationing direct on your ascendant at 17. So there's like the sort of disruptive or unexpected element of it to some extent in terms of your body and physical health as represented by the ascendant. But then also with Jupiter stationing there, the sort of getting lucky and being able to have some medical way to address that and to get ahead of it.
Yeah, it's pretty I mean, it's pretty astounding looking at this bi-wheel, which is I've never done that before, but reproductive cancer isn't something that I'll have to worry about for the rest of my life. So, like you said, I'm feeling very lucky.
Yeah, that's really great that you've like precluded that as a possibility that you'll
Mhm.
have to deal with in the future. And so that was just a few days before your birthday or your solar return as well.
Yes, it was. It was
How old did you turn?
53.
53. So what perfection is that? So
I believe it's
48, go ahead.
Mercury.
So 48 is first house, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53. So that's sixth house. So you turned 53?
I did. On January 15th, I turned 53.
Got it. Okay. So that's activating all of those placements and just yeah, and then the recovery process for that and taking care of your health and dealing with some of those lingering sort of side effects that you mentioned.
Right. I'm really going to be interested to see what happens when um Uranus moves out of Taurus because right now it's very close to that opposition to my natal Mars in Scorpio. I'm just curious if I'm going to have lingering effects from that, but I guess we'll see.
Mm. Yeah, well, I mean, I think now the good news is that's as far back to your ascendant that Uranus will ever get, and it's never going to retrograde that far back on top of that again. And I think that was really especially the focal point of some of the first house stuff would have been the activation of your ascendant and Saturn conjunction right there. So that's actually pretty positive in terms of moving on from that. And the Mars transit could just be like other things that come up, but it doesn't necessarily have to be as major as having had that surgery and going through that complete sort of transformation in some ways.
Yeah, that's a good word for it. I mean, it really affected just my day-to-day movements. It affected everything. It's kind of even difficult to describe how much it affected just my physicality, and it's really made me reflect on the last few months of health and not taking it for granted, just basic movement. So I mean, I definitely have had a new meaning about those first house topics, definitely after going through this experience.
Yeah, I really appreciate that because that's the other side of what we were talking about further or earlier, where first house transits can sometimes be about self and identity and what that means in terms of how you identify yourself and how yourself is presented to the world. But the other side of the first house is your body and your physical incarnation and like what it feels to be like in your body and what your experience of just like physical incarnation is. And sometimes that doesn't become as clear until there's a jolt to that. And then all of a sudden you're paying much more close attention to that and both the negative things and sometimes the downsides of that, but also sometimes the positive things and suddenly not taking for granted even small things, which all of a sudden take on a much greater importance and much greater appreciation. And sometimes that can be the benefit of like first house transits is having a renewed appreciation for the good things in life that come with, being in good health or being able to do certain things physically.
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's a really good example, and I really appreciated you sharing that. And I'm glad that you're, coming out the other side of that, and I hope it continues to go well.
Thank you so much, Chris.
All right, thanks.
Bye bye.
Bye. That was really good. I'm just seeing some of your other comments. I'm going to catch up on other comments here. Okay. Um, Let me take a very brief break for just a few minutes to refill my water, and then I'll come right back and we'll jump into doing your chart. All right, I am back. And for those watching the final version of this once it's released, so this is going to be a new series I'm doing where I'm recording and doing these live streams with patrons of the Astrology Podcast who are on the live stream tier. So if that's something you'd like to get access to, then all you have to do is become a patron of the Astrology Podcast through my page on Patreon at patreon.com/astrology podcast. And if you join the live stream tier, then you'll get a notification each time I send out the webinar registration link for one of these live recordings that we're doing through Zoom. And then you can have a chance to join me and have your chart read or just take part in the live chat that we're having today, which has been really great as we've been going through and talking to different people and discussing the examples that we're looking at. So thanks everyone who's joining me today for this experiment, since this is only our second time doing this, I think, on the Astrology Podcast. All right, Alison, let's talk about your chart. Let me promote you to a panelist. Hey.
Hello.
All right, thanks for joining me. What is your birth data?
June 25, 1985,
All right,
6:58 a.m. in Portland, Oregon.
got it. And your ascendant is 22 Cancer?
Yeah.
All right, so you have Cancer rising. Taurus is your 11th whole sign house and the place of friends and alliances and groups. And you natally have Venus in Taurus in the 11th whole sign house. So what's been going on with you in terms of that transit?
Yeah, so this year from September to May, I took a course related to my job, but it's sort of a higher education kind of course. I'm a psychotherapist and I took a course at a psychoanalytic institute. Funny enough, the course is about eating disorders and addictions, which I actually think has a bit of a Taurus flavor to it.
Yeah.
But the most 11th house part of it is it's really been helpful to meet new friends, and also start to build a new community with the folks that are involved with this institute. And
Nice.
especially helpful just because the Mars Uranus North Node conjunction from August 2022, I think it was, that was right on my Venus and was really brutal for friendships, like lost multiple friends that year. So
Okay.
it feels like Jupiter transiting my 11th has really helped to sort of rebuild community.
That's such an amazing contrast sometimes when you have a really difficult or negative or traumatic event where sometimes a malefic transit can cut something out of your life. And when it's going through the 11th house, it can be about the loss of a friend or having a friend removed from your life in some ways for different reasons. But then having the contrast with a benefic transit where you're actually gaining or adding to that area of your life, which can mean accumulating friends. Um, what were the circumstances? Well, what were the so part of it over the past year has been like connecting with other like-minded people who are focused on similar things.
Yeah, and especially because Jupiter rules my 9th, that sort of the fact that I've built community through like a higher education kind of course stuck out to me.
Nice.
Um,
Yeah.
Interestingly, too, the course is sort of hybrid, like online and in person. I was one of the online participants. Some of the people were in person, but everybody, for the most part, is in my local community in Los Angeles. And I am in a 3rd house year as well, perfection-wise.
Nice. Nice. Okay. And what were, in terms of like the longer term impact, since for some of the other people we've been talking about, well, actually, that's interesting in terms of that it was the Jupiter Uranus conjunction and it's been technology to the extent that you've been attending online or like virtually in making some of those connections. What's been the longer term impact of Uranus transiting through your 11th house since what 2018 timeframe? You said you had that one incident with the Mars Uranus conjunction. What were the circumstances surrounding losing those friends?
Yeah, it was related to sort of a surprising, I'll use the word betrayal kind of loosely. And so like very suddenly lost a few friends around like a specific betrayal that happened leading up to the Mars Uranus North Node conjunction on my Venus.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
How has the topic of friends been for you otherwise? Because it's interesting because you have kind of like mixed placements with it, where Venus is in its own sign and Taurus in the 11th whole sign house, which is a good placement. Jupiter is overcoming it through a superior square from the 8th house from Aquarius, but then also with the Saturn opposition in a date chart from Scorpio to Taurus, sometimes there can be some tensions or some coldness or challenges there, especially early in a person's life that can sometimes get better as you get older. But I know sometimes earlier on, Saturn aspects that are hard like that can be a little challenging.
Yeah, I think both in friendships and in romantic relationships, since Saturn rules my 7th, um, like I tend to have few but very close, strong friendships, and they tend to take a long time to develop. Like I sort of warm up and get to know people pretty slowly. I think I'm more quick to warm nowadays compared to when I was very little and more shy. But I've usually always had very good friends, but not a lot of them.
That makes sense. Do you think was shyness one of your primary barriers earlier in life?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
Shy
that
and
makes
sort of anxious and reserved.
yeah, that makes sense. Even just having, for example, like the ruler of the ascendant in the 4th house can also be more of a private placement or a tendency to be a little bit more private of a person as opposed to, having a bunch of stuff in the 10th house and being more public or more extroverted.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, well, I think that's a really great thing then, or great example, just in terms of growth in groups and friends and relationships and alliances. And that creating something that'll be a little bit more long lasting for you, especially having had like eclipses taking place there as well and everything, and sort of ending that one cycle and starting a new cycle when it comes to your life and your relationship to groups and friends and social movements.
Yeah. And one other additional thing just related to that Saturn opposition is I also started a relationship with somebody in the course, like a romantic relationship, that sort of came to fruition as Jupiter conjoined Venus and then opposed my Saturn.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Yeah, so it was opposing the ruler of your seventh house, which is that Saturn. What profession, how old are you? What profession were you in?
I'm 38, about to turn 39, so I've been in a third house Virgo profection.
Virgo. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Just been activating Virgo. So that means also that if you perfect from like the seventh house for relationships, it was going to Pisces, which is your ninth house, and then you ended up like meeting through that. That's actually pretty
Mhm.
cool that it was activating Jupiter as the ruler of the year relative to relationships.
Yes, and my solar revolution for the year was also Virgo rising and Virgo moon. So Pisces was the seventh house for my solar revolution this year.
Okay, cool. Cool. Well, congratulations. That sounds like a lot of really good developments from some of those conjunctions. And it's nice seeing it, especially when some of the conjunctions go exact, or when you see Venus and Jupiter coming together, that you know it's going to be something particularly important. So it's cool seeing the effects of that like manifest like almost immediately.
Yeah, yeah. Love
Cool.
astrology.
Yeah, it's crazy that it works as well as it does and as consistently. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
All right. Seeing some people are having to go. Thanks everyone for joining us in the live chat today. This has been really fun. Let me see if I can, let me see what other examples that were written examples that I meant to include as we're getting towards the end of this. So a listener named Missy wrote in saying 8th house transit of Jupiter was very literal for me. I had an inheritance, new debt for a vehicle due to partner's car accident, and death of a parent. So that was a really interesting one, pretty straightforward. A listener named Dawn, who I don't think is here, wrote in with a resolution of a health issue with Jupiter transiting the 6th house. They said, I began experiencing persistent female health issues in 2020 for the first time since my 20s. It was really disconcerting. Doctors couldn't figure out what it was and kept treating me for UTIs and sending me to urologists and other specialists to test for cancer because of visible blood in my urine for almost 2 years. Jupiter came along and bam, my GYN figured out it was a pretty uncommon autoimmune that generally only women in their 50s can experience. She said that in 40 years, she had only seen 3 other women with it. Still took almost the entire year for it to resolve, even with the medication. And when Uranus did pass in retrograde over my natal Saturn in Taurus, it got worse. A month ago, it just stopped. No meds, no more discomfort, just gone. Shaking my head at how well I can see it from the other side, and very grateful for it to be seemingly done. Thank you, Jupiter, for the lesson and the closure. So again, that's just another great example of sometimes the benefic is, getting lucky and like having a doctor in her instance who was able to figure out what it was, even though it was a very rare thing that she hadn't seen before or had only seen a few instances of. And sometimes that makes all the difference. Listener named Michelle who said Jupiter in Taurus was in my 5th house. My natal Venus is in the 12th. My daughter graduated from college and is continuing on for her second degree and master's. I recently abandoned all hobbies that were paying side gigs, and over the last year started aggressively baking and doing paint by number simply for pleasure and no pay. And yesterday I signed up for an 8-week plein air painting class. I almost completely stopped posting on social media. my partner and I already had a healthy routine, but started an ahem new routine that has improved to dramatically increase the frequency of our intimate times. I actually scoured these comments for a sixth house experience because I'm a bit concerned. So that's a great fifth house one that just checks a number of boxes. When you have fifth house transits, if you have children, sometimes what happens is there's major developments in the life of your children or major milestones in terms of your child's life. In this instance, it was her daughter graduating college, which is a pretty big milestone. The other one was creativity and learning to be more creative. The fifth house is the house that is the joy of Venus. And that's another one of those significations that sounds like just a random blow off signification of like that which is done for pleasure or fun and games and enjoyment, but it's actually a major part of life that everybody has to have both, on the one hand, some creative outlet, but also something that you do for enjoyment or you do for fun, because sometimes those are the things, it's not the only thing, but those can sometimes be at different points in our life. The things that really make life worth living is the things that we really just enjoy doing for the fun of it. And sometimes having a fifth house benefic transit can really reconnect you with either something new that you enjoy and like doing, like a new hobby, or sometimes it can have you reconnecting with old things that you really enjoyed that you'd sort of forgotten about or got away from. And just learning how to bring fun and enjoyment into your life again can be a major part of that. And then finally, the other fifth house signification is like sex, sexuality, and intimacy. And good fifth house transits can often be like an expansion of that and reconnecting with that as well, especially if you've gone through a period where that hasn't gone as well for a period of time. So those are five really great examples of fifth house transits. Let me see what other live ones there were. If there were other houses, what houses, if anyone could let me know, have we not covered so far yet? I think we've had a pretty good distribution at this point. So just looking through some of the ones that were submitted. Jessica has a sixth house one. Okay, so yeah, Jessica, if you want to share that one, that could be a good one to go over really quickly.
I'm
Hello.
unmuted now. Sorry,
No
sorry.
problem.
I'm sitting here on my bed because it's the best place for me to be right now. And
No
let me
problem.
okay, and sorry, I'm not exactly presentable.
That's
And
okay. You're
let
good.
me
You're good. What's your birth data
July 4, 1950,
and what time?
and it was 8:45. Wait a minute, 7:45 p.m. and it was in um, Stolzenau. I'm going to have to spell it for you. Germany, Stolzenau, Stolzenau.
Okay, I think I got it. Is
You
your
got it?
ascendant 28 Sagittarius?
Yes, it is.
All right. So Sagittarius rising, Taurus is
Yes.
your sixth house, and then your IC
Yes.
is there as well.
Yeah, it's because it's so far north. Yeah.
Right. So what was the Jupiter and Taurus transit like for you over the past year?
Oh my God, it's been so up and down. It's been a million health things, and some of them have been good, and some of them have not been good. But yeah, the main one, I'd say, the most unusual one, is that I had a small stroke that blinded me in my right eye. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, it was really very scary. I just like the curtain closed from left to right, and it was blind. And then a few minutes later, the curtain opened from right to left, and I wasn't blind. So I called the doctor and she said, "Oh, go to the emergency room right now," which I did. And they said it was a stroke. And they made me stay in the hospital where they did a bunch of tests. And I found I had something called AFib. Have you ever heard of it?
No, what is that?
Atrial fibrillation of the heart means your heart in one chamber is like beating abnormally fast, but only one chamber.
Okay.
And you have this little appendage on that chamber that's like a little appendix. It's very small, but it's there. And it causes clots. And that's where the blood clots form that become strokes. So if I hadn't had that, I wouldn't have known about the AFib, and I could have had a much worse stroke. But as a result, they put you on a bunch of blood thinners, which of course make you a walking bruise. And I became an instant candidate for something called a Watchman, which is a little device they put in your heart, and it closes off that appendage and makes it possible for you to not have to take blood thinners. And that's what happened in December while Mars, the surgeon, was traveling through my first house. So that was like a very unfortunate thing.
Right.
And I found a wonderful cardiologist as a result of all of this, a wonderful person. So that was a unfortunate thing.
When in
Also,
December was the surgery?
December the 14th.
14th. Okay, got it. So
It was
just
really weird. Did you see how that Mars is going right there?
yeah, let me animate the chart. I mean, I do know that would have been just like a couple weeks before Jupiter stationed in your sixth house again, and we saw that
Yes.
with one other chart example. So it's interesting seeing that again, that the station was like the thing that was necessary to rectify or to fix the issue, which then reinforces the idea that Jupiter's like trying to help out in that position.
Exactly.
Okay, so December 14th, you think it was?
Yeah, it was December 14th. I know that. I'll never forget that day. You don't forget the day you have heart surgery.
Yeah, there's Mars at 14
Yeah.
Sagittarius going through your first house, and that's a good reminder. It's like sometimes people are nervous about Mars transits or other things when they have surgery, but it's like, no, I mean, even if a surgery is successful, they have to, cut open your body in order to get in there, in order to fix things. And sometimes that's the necessary component of Mars, that cutting component, that can be necessary and restorative sometimes, so that while it's, sometimes you just have to do what you have to do, and you'll have difficult transits like that because you're experiencing a major health issue that has to be addressed, but it's not something that you can necessarily like avoid or work around completely.
Right. And it was actually a lucky thing because you can die of the what AFib causes, and I didn't know I had it.
Right.
So yeah.
So
So it was
if you hadn't had that episode with your sight, then you wouldn't. And do you know when that happened?
yeah, that happened June 6th. And you'll see that I think Jupiter was conjunct the North Node.
June 6th of 2023.
Yep.
Okay, yeah. So Jupiter had just gone in and it was conjoining the North Node, and it was on top of the degree of your IC at 4 degrees
Yeah.
of Taurus.
Yes. Yes.
Wow. Okay.
So yeah, wow, it's right. But you see also that Mercury is conjunct Uranus.
Oh,
And that's
yeah.
the nervous system.
Hmm.
How about
Yeah.
that? Isn't it? I mean, it's so literal. You can't make this shit up. Oh, sorry. You
Yeah,
can't make
totally.
this stuff up. So
And then
yeah.
the
And yeah, so I just want to add that besides sometimes being a good thing, it's sometimes not a good thing because just in the past month, we found out that our dog, who of course is in the sixth house, has a tumor on her liver, 28 centimeters long, growing across two lobes of her liver. And
mm,
obviously, she's not going to survive, but we're going to see a specialist on Tuesday to see how much relief we can get her, or if there isn't going to be a chance of relief at all. So, yeah, There's that. Jupiter grows things, and it grew a tumor on her liver. But I suppose better that my dog have the tumor than me. So,
Yeah, I'm
I
sorry to
mean,
hear that. I mean, that's
it was,
definitely a thing, though, that it can come up in the lives of people around you sometimes and not necessarily yourself.
yeah,
I know I had that. I was in like an eighth house perfection year, and then right when the transit happened that I was the most nervous about, my cat died, and it was a cat that I had had for over a decade, and so it was kind of a big emotional event.
this is
But
going to be very emotional. Yeah, it's going to be, well, I mean, we're going to spend whatever it takes,
right.
if you could cure a dog of liver cancer, we're going to try. So, but
When did you find out about it?
a month ago,
A month ago. Okay. Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
one of the things
a month
about this
ago.
is just that I was looking up in the forecast, that's tricky is just one of the things in terms of the sequence of the transits right now is we've had this Jupiter transit over in Taurus over the past year, and that's been for some people offsetting or ameliorating difficulties in whatever area of the chart that is. But now that Jupiter is departed from Taurus, it's kind of like removing that, and then Mars will go into
Yeah.
Taurus this month. And that was one of the reasons why I was kind of emphasizing that, because then, that can raise some challenging issues in just that area of the life or what area that is.
Yeah, and it is, and yeah, it's pretty literal. So for me personally, you know, I have some long-term health issues as, a little different from you, but I have some long-term health issues too. And they have not gotten better during this Jupiter transit. I wish I could say that they had, but they have not. They're autoimmune and they have not gotten any better.
Mhm.
So I don't know how you'll experience a sixth house transit when it's your turn, but yeah,
Yeah, well, I'm glad at least that when it came to that other issue that it helped to raise awareness and eventually find a way to get that resolved so that that didn't become a much larger issue or even lead to,
yeah,
something worse. So I'm really glad to hear
yeah,
that.
yeah. That was the best thing about the Jupiter transit is it fixed something that could have been the end. You can die of a stroke or you can be worse than dead. You can be, you know, in a not conscious state. So that was a really good thing.
Yeah,
And I think it
definitely.
was amazing that my eyesight came back. They say that doesn't usually happen.
Yeah, somebody was asking about eyesight recently. Maybe it was in my Hellenistic course and what indicates that. And usually it's the luminaries, like the sun and the moon are usually the spot in the chart that you look to for that. And um, I know your moon is in Pisces, and so Saturn
Yes.
was transiting over it. So that was
Yeah.
probably the indicator for that as being a potential area of problem. But it's good that, you know, while that came up, it ended up being something that helped alert you to the other issue that you were then able to fix.
I had to just to tell you how literal astrology is. When Saturn entered Pisces, a connection on our water softener broke and flooded our finished basement.
Oh,
And
that's
I
amazing.
mean, we had $10,000 worth of damage. Yeah. And it
Oh,
was just
well,
as, yeah, it was really crazy. I just got the last of our deductible back from the responsible party, which was the vendor of the water softener.
right. So the um Pisces is your fourth house, so it's your
Yeah.
house, and literally as soon as Saturn went into Pisces, a water main broke and flooded your house.
Yeah. There's a coupling to connect the water supply to a water softener. We have hard water here. I don't know about you, but so it broke apart and we didn't know for a full hour. And I don't know how many 100 gallons of water poured into our basement, finished basement. So yeah, it's
Wow,
very literal.
Yeah, that's one of those astrologer good stories where it's like a
Yeah,
big catastrophe happens, but
yeah,
sometimes the astrology is so good that you're
yeah,
almost just impressed that it's showing exactly what's happening.
yeah. It made me so that I wasn't so, I mean, I was laughing about it after we dried everything out.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Meanwhile, your husband is like, what are you laughing about?
right. He thinks I'm crazy.
Right. Yeah. But you're like, no, look at it. It's Saturn is literally transiting my fourth house right now, and this makes so much sense. Well,
Uh,
we all appreciated that, and I appreciate that you could share that story because that's a really good one. And so I'm sure all the astrologers will get a laugh from that.
okay. Well, thank you so much, Chris. I wouldn't miss any opportunity to see you on a live stream. So thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Bye now.
All right, bye. And Andy, that's like a pretty good one, a fifth house one that deals with other people's children or the topic of children in your life in general. If you feel like sharing that one, I think it's going to ask you to unmute.
Yeah.
There you go.
Hey,
Hey, thanks for joining me. What's your birth data
it's August 28th, 1987,
and what time
5:43 p.m.,
and where?
Baltimore, Maryland.
Got it. All right. Your ascendant's at 25 Capricorn.
Hmm.
All right. So Capricorn rising, you have Taurus is your fifth whole sign house, and the degree of your IC is also in Taurus at 18 degrees of Taurus. So what's been going on with that transit this year?
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. Let's see. I just had my Jupiter return at the end of Aries there, right
Mhm.
before the ingress. Um,
In your fourth house.
in my fourth house, yeah. And at my Jupiter return, I adopted a puppy. Which ended up, as soon as uh Jupiter ingressed into Taurus, that was like the whole beginning part of that for me
Hmm.
was having this puppy, which felt like a baby energy.
Nice, nice.
Yeah. And different kind of babies, but my partner and I also started a small garlic farm. So we ended up growing like 2,000 garlic plants so far.
Okay. So there's like a major component of like growing and horticulture and things like that. That's something that's come up a lot lately. I've realized with earth signs, especially with Taurus and with Virgo.
Yeah, so that felt very, very Taurus to be growing food and farming. And so that was most of my Jupiter through Taurus transit was the garlic farm.
Got it. And then the primary thing I want to talk about is that it's your fifth house and there was a child that came into your life.
Yeah, actually, the day after the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, right at the end of transit there, my partner's sister had a baby, so we have a niece.
Wow. Okay. So
Yeah,
was that the first niece or first sort of child your partner's siblings had?
it's the second.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, Cool. So yeah, that's one of the things that comes up sometimes in transits that people catches people off guard, but sometimes it's just like a child is born in general that is related to your life in some way, and it can come up under a fifth house transit. And sometimes people overlook that because they assume it has to be like their own children when a fifth house transit is happening, but it's not necessarily. Sometimes it's just like the concept of children coming up in the person's life in some way.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm an only child, so this is my chance to have niece, or like any kind of nibbling. So it's extra exciting.
Nice. That's awesome. Awesome.
Yeah,
Well, congratulations. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's a good Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in the fifth house story.
for sure.
Cool. All right. All right. So let me see where are we at? 2.5 hours. Okay. Yeah, Kristen, if you'd like to jump on and share that fourth house story, that would be good. We've done a few fourth house ones, but it might be worth talking about. All right. Hey,
Hi,
all right. Thanks for joining me.
thanks for having me.
So what's your birth data?
It's January 12th, 1984 at 8:11 a.m. and Tucson, Arizona.
All right. And your ascendant is at 2 Aquarius?
Yep.
Perfect. All right. So Taurus is your fourth whole sign house. You have the moon in Taurus at 5 degrees. What was this Taurus transit like for you?
Pretty good. So we ended up buying a house. It was not expected. We hadn't been looking for a house in a while because all the prices had been going up, and I think we kind of gave up on it. And kind of randomly, I just got it in my head to start looking, and everything happened super suddenly and out of nowhere. And we ended up finding kind of a perfect house and made a big move.
When did this,
So
what was the time frame?
so I started looking, it was at the very end of March, it was like the last couple of days of March last year, and then we closed on the house on the 13th of June.
Okay, so
And
not long after Jupiter went into Taurus.
yeah,
Okay, that's really cool. And then you had the unexpected component. I guess Uranus probably would have been pretty close to the degree of your IC around then, I would think, right?
it was, so my IC is at 20 degrees, and it was, Uranus was also at 20 degrees on the days that we closed. So it was
Wow.
kind of hovering around there. Jupiter was on top of my moon the day we closed as well, and the North Node was right there as well. So
And
that was interesting.
what was the day you do you know the day you closed?
13th of June, 2023.
Okay, let me show that. There it is, June 13th. Okay, yeah, your IC is at 2034 Taurus and Uranus was at 2053. So you get the unexpected component of how quickly it happened, especially since you weren't looking up to that point. And then not only was Jupiter on top of your natal moon at 5 degrees of Taurus, transiting Jupiter was at early 6, but the moon actually like swooped into Taurus that day and conjoined Jupiter. So you had a moon Jupiter conjunction that day that would have been on top of your moon, right? As you're like buying this house.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was really interesting because there was that, and fourth house perfection year. My solar return chart also had Jupiter in the eighth house for loans, and Jupiter was the ruler of my fourth and seventh house. I bought the house with my husband. I feel like there was something else, and I cannot for the life of me remember it, but it was interesting. And then kind of like I said, the house ended up coming with plumbing issues. And then, Saturn in Pisces is my second house, and it's just been like very literal. And I've been laughing at like the forecast episodes at, when you guys are talking about all the literal water stuff, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this has been my life of all the flooding and having to replace piping and the water heater, and it's been painful. And I'm like, please just leave Saturn now.
Right.
So
Water heaters can be really expensive. So you're actually having to spend a lot of money on like basically home water maintenance issues.
yeah, and then the main sewer line was very painful. So we've spent like tens of thousands of dollars
Well,
in since we bought the house in plumbing stuff, and it's not over yet. So love the house though. I mean, it has been perfect for us, and the household has grown as well. My mother-in-law came and moved in. My daughter came back. We got another dog. It's just kind of been a lot of extra stuff, and so I mean, overall it's been good. It's just that kind of all the financial stuff related to that's been a little crazy, but
yeah, that makes sense. It's just expenditures in the Saturn transiting through your second house. And then even I just realized, like, just before you bought the house, there would have been an eclipse in Taurus, probably around the time that you started looking. It's like, well, more like May.
Yes, I was trying to
Yeah.
remember. Yeah.
Yeah. It was just backing it up. There it is. So, oh yeah, Aries, right. It was jumping back and forth in this whole axis. But yeah, there would have been Taurus and Scorpio eclipses just preceding the purchasing of the house. So that was another major thing in terms of the timing aspect of that.
Yeah. Oh, and then zodiacal releasing as well. There were some changes and some losing of the bonds right around some relevant dates as well. I know there was a change for spirit kind of right before I started looking. Level 2 change for spirit right before I started looking. Level 3 change for fortune at that same time also. And then a losing of the bond when we were told that we could actually move forward with this house. And then also right before we closed, and then also when we moved.
Wow, nice. Yeah, the loosening of the bond is always one of the most reliable parts of the technique, just in terms of showing a major transition. And that keyword seems very abstract until it actually happens, and all of a sudden you see a major transition
Yeah.
happening in your life.
Yeah, it's been really, really fascinating. Some of it painful, but so interesting astrologically when you kind of, yeah, see all the little things line up and it's like, oh, okay. It's fascinating. It's very
Yeah,
cool.
for sure. Cool. Well, congratulations. I hope that
Thank you.
works out in terms of some of the Saturn transits, but thanks for sharing that example. That's a really good one.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, take care.
You too.
Starting to get towards the end of this. Let me look at some of the ones that were submitted that were written in so I could read off some of those so I don't overlook any. Okay, so there was a listener named Jenny who said, Jupiter transiting my 8th house. After a disappointing house valuation a couple of years ago, I finally organized myself to apply for a loan with my mortgage company, which involved getting the house revalued again. The valuation went up by $90,000, which was amazing since I'd only spent $10,000 on it, which I borrowed from my parents. I got the loan I needed, paid off all my credit card debt, and cleared my son's credit card debt just as Jupiter was trining his natal Jupiter in the first house. There was also a delay in the process that I thought was annoying at the time, but resulted in me getting the same amount at a lower rate because the interest rates on the products changed during the delay. So that's super positive. Jupiter, 8th house stuff when it comes to debt, loans, and financial matters in general, as well as borrowing money in general. So that's a really great example. There was one that was sent in by a listener named Erin that had a 4th house, 5th house transit. And I will show the chart that they sent in. So Erin said, Jupiter transited my 4th house in Aries and my 5th house in Taurus, where my IC is located. We began a construction project during the Aries transit to add an in-law suite onto our home so that my husband's parents could come live with us, essentially expanding not only our house, but our family as well. It was completed and they moved in with Jupiter and Taurus. So that's really beautiful. And that's a great additional example of what we were talking about earlier, where sometimes what happens is you get a transit through the 4th whole sign house and matters related to the home, the living situation, and the parents come up. But then if the IC is in the 5th house, you'll get basically like an extended 4th house transit, and you'll see 4th house stuff continuing to come up as Jupiter goes into the 5th house and conjoins the IC. So that also works if the IC is in the other houses, like it'll happen in the 3rd house, for example. If you have the IC in the 3rd house, you'll get 3rd house and 4th house things coming up during a 3rd house transit, but then you'll get a continuation of the 4th house stuff coming up after that when the transit goes into the 4th whole sign house. So that's the way that I do transits, and that's how you pay attention and why it's important to pay attention to both the whole sign house placement, but also what signs the floating midheaven and IC are located in, because they will import 10th house and 4th house topics into whatever whole sign house they fall. So that can be very important, and it always comes out the most clearly when you're looking at transits, because you can see the sequence of things developing in that specific way. Another one by a listener named Adriana wrote in about a second house transit. They said Jupiter transited my second house, which was my husband's 8th house, with my late husband's 8th house, with natal moon at 13 degrees of Taurus, and he passed away in June of 2023. I then inherited money, which I will add that all of this was a surprise and a shock, which is Uranus. So yeah, that's really tough with Jupiter transiting through the second house with Aries rising. And then natally, Jupiter is in the 8th house in Adriana's birth chart. So in that instance, you have transiting Jupiter opposing natal Jupiter, kind of unlocking that placement in some ways. And then the inheritance and things like that coming as a result of that, as well as the Uranian element of it being sudden or unexpected. So I'm sure there's like other points surrounding that we could go into and talk to if they were here, especially in terms of eclipses and the placements of the nodes and things like that. But that's another aspect of the 8th house that comes up sometimes, is either inheritance or shared resources from a partner becoming more prominent, as well as issues pertaining to death and mortality in general, and just the process sometimes of grieving and of dealing with all the different things that come along with that, including funerals and making arrangements and end of life things and different things like that. So there was one from a listener named Maria. So Maria had Leo rising. Maria wrote Jupiter transit. So Maria has Leo rising and Taurus is the 10th house. Maria wrote, Jupiter transiting my 10th. May I add, along with Uranus, I opened a dog grooming business in my garage with zero intention of doing anything but a few dogs a day by myself. By 2018, I had employees in my garage, and by 2021, I moved my salon out into a storefront. So it sounds like this is part of the extended Uranus transit that began going through the 10th house in like 2017, 2018, which can sometimes bring things that are like unexpected that you weren't planning on. All right, so continuing with Maria's story, they say by 2022, 2023, I had had my biggest revenue ever, like almost 225,000 in 2022 and 345,000 in 2023. This came with a tremendous amount of unexpected happenings, of course, thanks to Uranus. Now in April of 2024, my husband, mom, and I decided we were moving to Cheyenne, Wyoming, and we currently live in Oregon. My dad lives in Cheyenne right at the start of the eclipse. My dad lives in Cheyenne right at the start of the eclipses. Now, as Jupiter has left Taurus, my business is up for sale. My mom's house has sold. My husband has interviews in Wyoming this week. I've restructured my business to run without me, hopefully. I'm in a Saturn ruled perfection year with the 7th house as of May 19th. So I do expect that my husband will be in Wyoming without me longer than we're hoping. I'm sure I'm missing some other huge things, but let's say this Jupiter in Taurus transit has been a wild ride for me. So, and that's really interesting, of course. Natally, they have Jupiter in the 4th house in Scorpio. So that's getting activated, and that's part of through that opposition. And that's part of the reason that the 4th house home and living situation stuff is coming up, because this transit also represents the Jupiter opposition. But it's also interesting because it's a good example that we've seen a few times so far of the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, almost in some ways representing the culmination of the Uranus transit through Taurus that's been happening since 2018, and all of the major changes and stuff that have been going on over the past decade as a result of that transit in that part of the life. In this instance, in the area or the sector of the chart that has to do with career. And then finally, in some ways, it sounds like reaping the benefits or the rewards of that now that that Uranus transit is almost over, in this instance with selling the business or having some new version of the business that's being run without them at this point. But it very much sounds like a culmination of things that had been worked on for several years up to this point. And I think that's a really interesting manifestation of that we're seeing archetypally a few different versions of that so far in some of the stories that we've seen here today. There was a listener named Maud. So Maud writes, they have Taurus rising with Jupiter in Aries in the 12th house. So they wrote, Jupiter in Taurus very much followed Jupiter in Aries in my 12th house. I got a job in prison as a counselor with natal Jupiter in Aries. And this was also during my Jupiter return. So the 12th house is the house of prison traditionally, which is often one of those significations that sounds like old or antiquated. And this is me digressing here, old or antiquated, but sometimes when 12th house transits come up, like prison or places of isolation, like hospitals and other things like that, can really become more prominent. So this is a good example of that. All right, back to their story. I got a job in prison as a counselor when Jupiter entered Aries in May of 2022. When Jupiter entered Taurus, I got accepted into graduate school for a PhD on art counseling in prison, which I'm pursuing now and in the upcoming years. When Jupiter in Taurus was trining my midheaven at 15 degrees of Capricorn, which is in the 9th whole sign house, I also started working in a forensic psychiatric clinic. Thus, I work in a prison and a forensic psychiatric clinic now. After almost a full Jupiter cycle of struggling in my career, I graduated from university when Jupiter was in Gemini last time and was unemployed or only had jobs I very much disliked until Jupiter entered Aries. I finally feel like I'm on the right path and doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Talking first house topics, finally being able to share my talents with the world professionally and being and becoming my greatest self professionally, aka living my potential and learning and growing. I feel like that acorn that is finally becoming a tree. That's really beautiful. And then they said, additionally, on May 18th, with the Sun-Jupiter conjunction, I went to Paris for the weekend. Paris is very close to a Jupiter ascendant line in my astrocartography map, which I checked after your recent episode on astrocartography. As we know, Venus was also conjunct Uranus, and Venus is my current profection year lord. It was a very Venus-Uranus to go for a first date to another country and to go on a date with a woman. While I've known for a while that I'm bisexual, somehow I've always been with men. I've been on dates with women before, but those never lead to anything. This date was amazing and did lead to more, and being with a woman felt so right. How Jupiter Kazemi is in the first house trine my sun plays into this. Big identity confirmation. I'm very much bi, and I love it, and I want to scream it from the rooftops. So I thought that was an amazing example because, of course, like we were saying earlier, first house transits always also activate the 7th house, and sometimes finding out new things about one's identity and how one sense of self relates to others can be a major part of that transit, which it was in this instance. So there's like a bunch of kind of interesting things going on here and different interesting activations. And one of the things you have to remember about transits is transits are always activating the natal potential of what's already in the birth chart. So the birth chart from the moment you're born already has all these different potentials built into it. And what it takes is the transits to activate, for some transit to come along and activate that placement. And then all of a sudden, in some instances, at different points in the life, you'll see the full manifestation of what that placement means when the circumstance manifests in your actual life. but it's usually not something that just comes completely out of nowhere, but instead it was something that's often laying dormant in the birth chart until it's time for it to wake up and become active in the person's life. And that's really a large part of what we're seeing when we're studying these transits, is looking for those activations. I'm going to just go through the very last of some of the written ones. So Jenny wrote in, who has Libra rising, so Taurus is the 8th house. Jupiter just concluded its transit through my 8th house, which has shown up in a few different ways in accordance with 8th house significations. My husband started a new job right after the transit began last year, making more than he and I combined the previous year. This change alleviated a lot of pressure I felt about income, and I was able to direct my energy towards facing mental health issues I needed to address. I was diagnosed with CPTSD and PMDD in January and then ADHD in April. And I'm very comfortable talking about this publicly because I've talked about it, because talking about it moves towards breaking stigmas related to mental health. As a result, I've been reprioritizing my life, established tangible goals for myself and my family, and started relying on the resources my friends and communities can provide so I don't have to feel so isolated. So I thought that was a really beautiful example of an 8th house transit, in having some of the financial things and also sometimes raising other things that can be addressed during that time as well. So that's really, really brilliant. So Ray writes in and says, it was a Jupiter return for me while Jupiter in Taurus, it was in the 7th house. So this is the 7th house Jupiter transit. My husband got promoted and kept getting surprise bonuses all throughout the year. This was extremely helpful as I had been laid off from work right as Jupiter entered into Taurus. I was unable to work most of the past year and was completely supported by my husband, so we were both very grateful for the extra surprise income that he kept getting. Jupiter in Taurus is his natal 2nd house, so it worked out great for both of us. So that's actually a super important transit lesson that I've seen a bunch of times over the years that sometimes surprises people is if Jupiter goes into your 7th house or sometimes even your 8th house and you're already in a partnership, sometimes that Jupiter transit isn't going to manifest in your life directly, but instead it's something positive happening in the life of your partner, which then sometimes indirectly benefits you in some ways. But 7th house transits, if you're already in a relationship or a partnership, sometimes manifest as like sudden good fortune happening in the life of your spouse or in the life of your partner. So that's a super important transit lesson. Amiyrah says that's exactly what happened to me, is still happening with Jupiter going to your 8th. All right, would you like to join me to talk about it? Maybe that can be my last example for the day. There we go. Hey, thanks for joining
Can
me.
you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
All right, so first things first, what's your birth data?
It is 3/18/1982,
Okay.
and that was at 10:17 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in Newark, New Jersey.
In Newark. Okay, Newark. All right. Is your ascendant 18 degrees of Scorpio?
Yes.
All right, got it. Here we go. So you have Scorpio rising. So Taurus is your 7th whole sign house. What's that transit been like for you this past year?
So, I mean, like you just said in the other example, it was mostly for my partner, my husband. He went from one job that wasn't very steady to an extremely steady job because it's a government job now. And he was put in a position where technically he doesn't have all the requirements for the position, but they put them in there anyway because they said they can see that he's going to have all the he has to pass a test, which is interesting because he's going to do that when Jupiter's in my 8th house. So once he passed that test, it'll help us to pay off more debts. So it's like all gonna work out because once he passes, he's actually gonna get a promotion.
Nice.
So we'll have more money that's not my money coming into the house. But he had that new job when Jupiter was in my 7th. And then just as he's gotten a new job, we've had that steady income, which means I didn't have to make as much income. So I could kind of take the back seat and focus more on 4th house stuff, which was very interesting. So like our home, we started doing renovations on our home. So it was a lot of auspiciousness for him, because he is my partner, so the house of partners. And even though my work slowed down, I actually ended up partnering with a company, and they've been my main partner for my work. So it's less work, but it's still a long-term partnership. And it's with a brand that I've wanted to be a partner with for a long time. So now I'm doing less work. I have more time for home, and like we have more time for him to travel. He does a lot of traveling to work too. He's a Leo rising. So his work is not nearby. He actually travels almost 40 minutes or so to work every day. So he's been kind of getting used to not being nearby and doing that travel, but also having it be a position where he's making more money. He does less work. So it's just been really fortuitous for him. It's been easier on his body. So I've been happy for him that he gets the benefit from my transit.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I like how, with Jupiter going through your 7th house, it's like he's having all of that growth and development and sort of good fortune. But then also, because you have Jupiter in Scorpio in the 1st house, it's activating that in terms of your 1st house of self and things being a little bit easier for you. And then it was also squaring your Venus in the 4th house. So it was activating that in terms of the home renovations and stuff. So it's a rare instance just because you have that Jupiter Venus square in both of those angular houses of what happens when you get a Jupiter transit to another angular house and you get that simultaneous activation of that placement that's already there at the same time.
Yeah. And because they're fixed houses, it was basically like, this is happening and it's going to stay the way that it is. Even the renovations that we've done, we recently, right before they finished up the project right before Jupiter went into Gemini, we got a deck in our backyard, which is kind of funny because we picked a material that is supposed to last about 50 years. So it's very fixed. So if anybody ever decides to take it down, if we sell the house, it's going to take them quite a bit to take it down, and they're going to have to figure out what they're going to do with that very hardened, structured material. So I just thought that was kind of funny when I explained it to my husband. He's not that much into astrology, but he likes to listen to me lament. So when I told him we're picking a material that's going to last for a long time, and I have a fixed 4th house, like it was funny. It was astrology good to me. So I thought that was pretty funny.
No, that's really perfect, especially when you have the doubling up of Taurus being your 7th house, but then the ruler Venus also being in a fixed sign. Those basic components of what the basic meanings of the houses of the signs are, including the modality like cardinal, fixed, and mutable, really does manifest in very literal ways sometimes, but it's hard until you're experiencing it to like fully appreciate like what that means in really tangible terms.
Yeah, and so I'm just excited to see what's coming up next, and like him being a Leo rising, that's another fix. We deal with a lot of fixed energy in our house, even with me being a Pisces. It's just a lot of finality, and when things change in our fixed areas in our charts, there's a lot of pushback, and then I have to remind everybody pretty much in our house, listen, if we just go with it, something will come out where it'll make it understandable and it'll last longer as long as we don't fight it. So when we had those the eclipses in Scorpio and Taurus, those were very eventful in our house because something always came up, especially in those houses, like in our partnership. Like that was around the time where he and I had a good sit down, like, okay, things are changing in our house and changing with our relationship. What do we want to try that's new? What do we want to keep? What's important to you? What's important to me? And we have an adult child now. So it was really important that we sat down and said, okay, we've launched one. Now we got to look at each other more in the face. What are, you know, how are we going to be evolved partners for each other? So, and that literally happened every time there was a Taurus eclipse or a Scorpio, and the Scorpio ones were more about, okay, I'm changing. So what are you okay with what's happening here? Because I'm just going to continue to change, and you'll have to figure out if you're okay or not. And, you know, we had to reevaluate a lot on our relationship. So it
That's
was interesting.
That's a great phrase. I think that really encapsulates a lot of what I see when people start having eclipses in that first house, seventh house axis, and they're in a partnership, is you start going through some major changes. And it's kind of like I'm changing, or I have changed. Are you still okay with that? And then needing to check in with the seventh house person, and the back and forth, the sort of dialogue that takes place as part of that process, or sometimes vice versa, like the partner goes through a major change, and then you having to adjust and determine in terms of your expectations if that's okay, and if you want to continue to go forward with that. And some couples, those changes become radical enough, and they sometimes drift away in certain ways that they do decide to call it quits under certain circumstances. But this is a great example of that not being the case, of the two of you working through it and deciding to move into that next level together.
Yeah, it was very interesting, and to kind of have that autonomy and say, this is what I'm interested in now. And, really being accountable to your partner, whether it works out or not, like, because you're kind of forced to have those conversations when you have those types of transits. Either you're going to have them, or you're going to be put in a position where you're stuck in a car in traffic or something, and it just comes up. So it has been very eye-opening to see how that has worked in our partnership.
Yeah, for sure. And I like that you use the term autonomy, because that's another good keyword for first house, seventh house transits, is sometimes finding the balance, like developing greater autonomy for yourself, especially as you come to new realizations about who you are, what you want in life, and things like that. And then having to then have some back and forth in terms of, with your new autonomy, how much of that you're willing to give up for the sake of the partnership. And usually during eclipses, people go through like a year and a half or 2 year period of going back and forth and putting more emphasis either on their own self-autonomy for a period of time, or other times putting more emphasis on the partnership, or having to give up some autonomy to the partner for whatever reason for a period of time, until eventually they find a way to balance that out by the end of the eclipse transit.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And once you put in other dynamics too, like I said, we have kids. So my Saturn being in my fifth house has been wrecking me as well. Just like figuring out, I'm turning into a new person, like I'm changing my style and my health is getting better. And then my kids are getting older, and I'm less so-and-so's mom. Because they're making new friends who have no idea who I am, and I have to kind of like live with that once your kids get older. So it's been very relationship heavy for me. But that's life.
Yeah, you said one of your kids is now an adult, so that's been part of the adjustment as well.
Yes, yeah, he's an adult and he has new friends. He's got an adult job, and I'm no longer, Brandon's mom, because they don't know me. So I'm not in that position of his circle knowing me, because they've been the circle that he's been with his whole life. He now has new friends and a new lifestyle and new routines. So it has been interesting to me to kind of let him fly in that way, and not have people, like his people, know me in that way. And they may never know me, because he may not introduce me to those people, and he's an adult, and we kind of have to maneuver that and be okay with it. So my husband and I have been kind of like processing, what is this life going to be like, where he really truly has his own life.
Mhm.
And he may have people who never ever meet us, because they may run through his life in a short amount of time, and they may never get to even meet his parents, and we won't have that influence on his circle. We'll always have an influence on him, but not his circle. So we've had to let go of those identities too, and kind of be okay with that.
has that been? So you used the word identity, that makes me think of the sun, and just having the sun in the fifth house. I know some people can, develop their identity as a result of being a parent, and really come into their own identity as a part of parenthood. So part of the issue there, part of what you're wrestling with, is just as he grows up and becomes more independent, that not entirely being part of your identity and needing to refocus what your identity is, and where it's coming from.
I mean, yeah, because I was a young mom, I was a mom from my early 20s until now, until forever, until I die. And so my identity, as I was even creating my identity, because in your early 20s, you're creating your identity. And then by the time that Saturn return came, I had been a mother for a while. So that was already a foundation in who I was as a person. And now I'm still a mom, but it's not, I cannot push it forward for that particular kid because he's an adult now. So he has his own things that he doesn't want me to share about his life. And it's been like that most of his teen years. So I kind of got a little practice there on that. But like, it's a hard line now. Like, I don't want you to talk about me. I don't want you to tell people where I work. I don't like it. And I have to honor that because he is of age. So I can't even like lean into, oh, I'm Brandon's mom. Like, I can't, it's like, mom, please don't talk about my stuff. Please don't, like, there's a hard line for me there. That Saturn is kicking my ass, truthfully, to tell you the truth. Like, it really is. It's
Sure.
giving me a tough time for my heart, but I understand it.
Yeah. Well, you'll emerge from it with a different sense of identity, and it'll be a little different than it was before, but it'll probably be in some ways better, as well, as you just readjust your expectations in terms of where you're all at now in terms of this part of your life and this phase of your life, and eventually growing into and finding like the good parts of that that are new, that maybe you hadn't expected before. And then also, whatever phases he's in at this point in his life, he's not always going to be there either. And so he'll go through different phases, maybe where things are closer or more distant, so that even if there's more of a need to push apart at this point in time, which is typical for a Saturn transit, that doesn't necessarily mean it's always going to be exactly like this, forever.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I see that. So I just want to share that because I'm sure there's people out there where like Saturn is literally kicking your ass right now. And just know you're not alone in that. And if you're feeling that, just kind of like go, it is what it is, and learn from it. And I've had to do that over and over again, especially for my mental health. As you can see, in my 12th house is busy. So my mental health has been like, all right, remember, it is what it is. Certain things you cannot change. And we will come out on the other side learning way more than we knew before. So that's been
For
like a
sure.
helpful thing to say over and over, as Saturn has been Saturning in my chart.
Right. Yeah. The last thing is just, you mentioned also like the social component of like not necessarily being introduced to his friends before. And I noticed that you have like the 11th house of friends is Virgo for you, and it's the ruler is in the fifth house of children. So it's like, in some ways, your child's friends have also been your friends up to this point, and that's part of what you were struggling with.
Yes, I mean, I've known their friends, like all three of my kids. I know their friends, but it's really, I know their friends, and then through their friends, I know their parents. So you start to get that kind of disconnect from the parents too, because our kids are not hanging out as much, or maybe they're not on speaking terms. So it's a little weird to kind of still talk to the parents of the kids that were in that younger circle group, because maybe they aren't connected or friendly anymore. So I've been having to navigate that part of relationships as well, as like, how do we continue to be friends or friendly if maybe our kids are in a rift, or our kids are just, they're not connecting anymore? Are we allowed to do that? Let's talk it through. So yeah, and I don't know why I never noticed that the ruler is in the fifth house, which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, well, that's just a really cool, unique manifestation of that transit that like you probably wouldn't find in like a traditional astrology textbook, but just makes sense and is showing up so literally in your chart, and is just different, for you having the ruler of the 11th and the fifth and having the circumstances surrounding that versus like for me, for example, that's not a scenario that would work out in my life since I don't have children. So that's not like an option open to me. But it's always cool seeing the different ways that the placements can manifest in ways that make sense, but that you wouldn't have known how to articulate up to this point. And that's why I love reading charts and talking to people about their lives, because you always learn something new every single time.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I've been enjoying Jupiter. I've noticed the pattern in my life of how Jupiter has worked out. When Jupiter ingressed into Gemini the last time, on that day I lost my grandfather. So kind of astrology good type stuff.
Right.
And he didn't tell us he was sick. We found out 2 weeks before. He was very secretive about him being sick, and I was not upset with him when that transit happened. So I'm just seeing how Jupiter's like, it brings an ease even with the hard things, because that was really hard for our family, but I was easeful for it because I thought he lived a good life. He died on his own terms, and lo and behold, the father figure in my life, passed away as soon as Jupiter egressed into my 8th house. That was kind of interesting to learn about as I started studying astrology. So it all works out, even if it doesn't feel like it's working out.
Yeah, I feel like when dealing with issues of like grief or loss, sometimes having to be able to see the perspective of the astrology and seeing how it's all mapping out some of those things, even when you're going through difficulties, can be a little bit affirming just in terms of understanding that it's part of a greater plan or part of a greater purpose, or that there's some sort of like narrative structure to our lives. I think can be helpful to get us through some of those difficult times, even if sometimes your heart is hurting at that time as well at the same time simultaneously.
Yep. Thanks, Chris. This is
Yeah,
awesome.
thank you so much for sharing that. This is a great example to round everything out and end this workshop. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
All right. All right, everyone. I think that was such a great example to end everything with that I think that's going to be it for today, since it looks like we're at about 3 hours. And I think that's probably as long as I can go for today's workshop. So thank you to everybody that submitted examples for this. There were so many good examples that came in. And I really enjoyed doing this, and I enjoyed talking to people about their lives and just reviewing everything. I wish I could talk to each person for like hours, because you could almost do a full episode or interview just based on a single person's chart. And maybe I will do more of those in the future. I actually did a zodiac releasing consultation with Samantha as a follow-up from our last episode where she was one of the first people I did in the last time doing these chart readings. And I posted that zodiac releasing consultation to my Hellenistic course so that students can see how I do a full zodiac releasing consultation. But I really like this format. This is partially like me returning to a format I developed years ago with some of the Mercury Cafe meetings, where if you go back and look at some of the past episodes of the Astrology Podcast, like I think we did one on Uranus transits through the houses, for example, which was a workshop like this, where people came up and shared their examples of Uranus transiting through certain houses in a live in-person workshop. And I haven't been doing those for a while, so it's good to get back to that with some of these webinars that I'm doing here with patrons of the Astrology Podcast, and I'd like to keep doing more of those in the future. So a few things. One, for people listening to this in the future, if you're watching on YouTube, let me know if you have a good example of Jupiter transiting through a certain house in your chart over the past year and how that's worked out in your life. I'd like to see additional examples posted to the YouTube comments. Additionally, because I want to do other workshops like this on the podcast over the summer, let me know if there's other topics that you'd like to see me cover for future workshops, either by posting it below the YouTube video or letting me know through my page on Patreon what topics you'd like to see, and maybe I'll run a poll to see what some of the next ones are that we'll do, and we'll do future webinars and workshops just like this one. So I think I'm going to keep it, because I'm running it through Zoom, I'm going to keep it so that if you would like to join us for future ones, then all you have to do is become a patron of the Astrology Podcast on the live stream tier or above. And then you'll be able to get a notification each time I schedule a new webinar like this. And you can join us in the live chat or have a chance to submit your chart example. So I think we're going to do lots of those in the future. So it should be a lot of fun this summer. Let's see, any other things? And the last thing is just if you want to learn more about how to read charts like I do and participate in other live chart reading workshops, you can also sign up for my Hellenistic astrology course, which is where I teach people how to read birth charts in the methods that I use. And you can use that promo code, which is Mercury, to get a 15% discount only this month in June of 2024. So find out more information about that at theastrologyschool.com. All right, I think that's it for this episode, and that's it for this webinar. Thank you, everybody who joined me for this, and thanks for everyone that was in the live chat and who came in and shared your chart examples. I really appreciate all of you, and I'm glad that we got to talk and do this as a group. It feels like, on the podcast, I've been teaching astrology for years and teaching the techniques or sharing celebrity charts, but it's another thing to be able to talk to people one-on-one, and I really appreciate that process, and I think it draws out the techniques and makes the astrology come alive in a way that's much more vivid than if you're just reading a celebrity chart or something like that. So thanks everyone who shared their charts today or who wrote in their examples. I really appreciate it. All right. Thanks everyone for listening to or watching this episode of the Astrology Podcast, and I'll see you again next time. If you appreciate the work I'm doing here on the podcast and you'd like to find a way to support it, then consider becoming a patron through my page on patreon.com. In exchange, you'll get access to some great subscriber benefits, including early access to new episodes, the ability to attend the live recording of the forecast each month, our monthly Auspicious Elections podcast, which is only available to patrons, a whole exclusive podcast series called the Casual Astrology Podcast, or you can even get your name listed in the credits. You can find out more information at patreon.com/astrologypodcast. Special thanks to all the patrons that helped to support the production of this episode of the podcast through our page on patreon.com. In particular, shout out to the patrons on our producers tier, including Christy Moe, Ariana Amour, Mandy Ray, Angelique Nambo, Issa Sabah, Jake Otero, Jeannie Marie Kaplan, Melissa Delano, Sunny Bozbaz, and Kwatsi Ali Barohu. If you're looking for a reliable astrologer to get an astrological consultation with, then we have a new list of astrologers on the podcast website that we recommend for readings. Most of the astrologers specialize in birth chart readings, although some also offer synastry, rectification, electional astrology, horary questions, and more. Find out more information at theastrologypodcast.com/consultations. The astrology software that we use and recommend here on the podcast is called SolarFire for Windows, which is available for the PC at alabe.com. Use the promo code AP15 to get a 15% discount. For Mac users, we recommend a software program called AstroGold for Mac OS, which is from the creators of SolarFire for PC, and it includes both modern and traditional techniques. You can find out more information at astrogold.io, and you can use the promo code AstroPodcast15 to get a 15% discount. If you'd like to learn more about my approach to astrology, then I'd recommend checking out my book titled Hellenistic Astrology, The Study of Fate and Fortune, where I go over the history, philosophy, and techniques of ancient astrology, taking people from beginner up through intermediate and advanced techniques for reading birth charts. If you're really looking to expand your studies of astrology, then I would recommend my Hellenistic Astrology course, which is an online course on ancient astrology, where I take people through basic concepts up through intermediate and advanced techniques for reading birth charts. There's over 100 hours of video lectures, as well as guided readings of ancient texts, and by the time you finish the course, you will have a strong foundation in how to read birth charts, as well as make predictions. You can find out more information at courses.theastrologyschool.com. And finally, thanks to our sponsors, including the Mountain Astrologer magazine, which is a quarterly astrology magazine, which you can read in print or online at mountainastrologer.com.